Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our town council meeting for June the 4th. If you would please kindly wait while we have roll call, and then we will move along.
Councilmember Andrews.
Present.
Councilmember Bailey.
Here.
Councilmember Ravazio. Vice Mayor First.
Here.
Mayor Condon.
Here. Okay, and if you'll all now stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this point on our agenda, it's open time, and that's for anyone here that has anything that they would like to comment on, so long as it's not already on the agenda. So if any of you have anything that you would like to speak to, if you'll kindly step up to the podium. Is there anyone here that has anything to speak on? Okay, seeing none, then I will close it to public comment. There are no presentations this evening, so we'll move on to the consent calendar. And before we do, I was going to ask if our council members will indulge me in changing the 4.1.4, that is actually should be under sanitary district items rather than under our business. Okay, does that work with everybody?
Yep.
Okie dokie. Then,
I would suggest, because the way that the agenda item was written, to not so much the location of the item, but because it's written in terms of the town rather than the sanitary district, that perhaps this item be continued to the June 19th meeting.
we can do that. I mean, the time isn't critical, so we can do that as well. For those of you that don't have an agenda in front of you, the item was to approve the appointment of Diane First to continue to represent the town of Corte Madera on the Central Marin Sanitation Agency Board of Commissioners through December 31st of this year. And because it is under the sanitary district rather than a town item, that is why I had asked for it to move to the sanitary district. But
Carla, if you want to pull it from the consent calendar, we can then approve the consent matters, and then I'll move to have it continued.
I'll
okay,
second.
if you'll do that. Okay, so then I think we can do that at the same time.
Sure.
To let's first approve business items 4.1.1 through 4.1.5, but pulling 4.1.5 and continuing
No,
it.
I'm pulling 4.1.4.
4.4.
I will move all the items on the consent calendar except 4.1.4.
Second.
Councilmember Andrews.
Yes.
Councilmember Bailey.
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio. Vice Mayor First.
Yes.
Mayor Condon.
Yes.
I will move that we continue item 4.1.4 to our June 19th, 2018 meeting.
Second.
Councilmember Andrews.
Yes.
Councilmember Bailey.
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio. Vice Mayor First.
Yes.
Mayor Condon.
Yes. Okay, thank you. And then we're going to move right along to what I think is probably the main event. And that is the public hearing for consideration and possible approval of an application for conditional use permit, design review, sign permit to allow for construction and operation of a restaurant with drive-through lane at 5839 Paradise Drive. And to also possibly do an introduction of a zoning ordinance amendment to permit drive-through restaurants in the C3 zoning. So if we could start with a staff report on that. Who do we have who's going to do the staff report? Doug, good evening.
Okay, so while we're getting things situated here, I guess I'll just direct your attention to some of the items that have come in and that are available for review. So I believe that there were some significant correspondence that's come in since the packet was put out last week. I believe there's copies that were distributed to the council members and additional copies that are available at the back of the room. Also, there's really, I guess, a significant amount of material that's available online. There's a project webpage at townofcortemadera.org with plans, prior staff reports, minutes. There's also a video of the prior planning commission hearing. So I just want to direct your attention to those materials. So this is an application that's been some time in the making. The applicants first came to the town toward the end of last year in the fall, and they came before the Planning Commission for a preliminary kind of a study session hearing to have a sort of an open discussion with the public, the Planning Commission, and staff to help inform the development of their application further. They then came back, I believe, and submitted a formal application in December of last year, and then they were reviewed by the Planning Commission on May 8th. And at that hearing, we received a significant amount of public input, standing room only in the room here, and lots of public comment. And staff recommended approval of the project. The Planning Commission also made a unanimous motion to recommend that the Town Council approve the resolution and introduce the ordinance that are included in attachment 1 and 2 of this packet. So those were recommendations from the council, from the Planning Commission, that you, the Town Council, adopt and introduce those resolution and ordinance. So tonight, I'm going to give kind of a brief overview of the project, kind of talk about the process that's required, and then go through a bit of staff's analysis and sort of discussion about the different findings and how they may be met by the application. So starting by talking about existing conditions here, just to get ourselves situated, we're looking at 5839 Paradise Drive on the east side of 101. This is a kind of a long, unique parcel, unique partly for the shape, also because it has no directly adjacent other land uses. Across the street on Paradise Drive, there's a real mix of commercial and semi-industrial uses, from automobile dealerships and repair centers to pet hospital, dog kennel, large equipment rental, and those are the most proximate uses here. It is in the C3 district, and we provide this sort of overview where the C3 district is in town, given that the zoning ordinance amendment would affect parcels in the C3 district. This is the highway commercial zoning district, located principally along the 101 corridor there, with quick on and off access from the highway. So we have the section that's near Pfeiffer Avenue, as well as the area that's in question here, which is on the south side of town. On the west, it's between Meadowsweet and Casa Buena, and here is this single parcel, the Zone C3, that's under consideration tonight, that's adjacent to the C4 district with all the uses that I previously described. So just go over quickly what the C3 zoning district is. This is a zoning district that's intended for automobile-oriented uses, such as automotive dealers, gas stations with mini marts, restaurants, and motels. So the application you have before you tonight is for a restaurant with a drive-through in the C3 district. Clearly an automotive use that does cater to drivers and automobiles, similar to the other uses that are in the C3 district currently. Just looking at the existing site, the existing condition is a former Denny's restaurant that I believe was there for over 40 years and closed up shop a couple years ago and has since remained vacant. Since that time, the town did receive an application for a mattress store. That application was eventually withdrawn, And here we have an application for a restaurant, so sort of a continuation of what's been the long time use of this parcel. The Denny's was the first development on this site. And as you can see here, this is, and we'll look at the existing site plan. It's kind of, the restaurant is located in the middle of the lot, surrounded by parking to both the north and the south, with the two driveways there. Some other unique aspects of this property are that the number of easements that run through it. There's a sewage pump station on the south side, as you can see there. There's also PG&E easement, I believe one other. These kind of, do present kind of a challenge for development of the site. We can go into more detail about that in a moment. But those are the existing conditions. You also have a two-lane road with parking, on-street parking on either side. There's no bike lane here, and there's no crosswalk to reach that site currently, and the sidewalk ends just on either side of this site plan that you can see. So it's a bit of an island, as is currently. So looking at the proposed project, the existing restaurant site is around 3,700 square feet, so it kind of gives you an idea of what that square footage looks like. The proposed would be just over 4,100 square feet for the restaurant, as well as 3,000 square feet of outdoor space. In total, it would have the capacity for 140 seats, or roughly thereabouts. As you can see, it would move the location of the structure to the south of the site, where the existing structure is in the center, kind of creating a more uniform parking area and allowing for a drive-through to be located between the building and the 101 Caltrans corridor there. So it kind of, the location of that pushes it away from the street, reduces the visibility of that element, and also allows it to provide a length that would be adequate to meet the anticipated demand of the proposed use. The site would provide, I think, 47 parking spaces. Some of that are employee spaces. Currently, restaurants are required to provide one parking space per 3 employees. That was used here as well. As we'll go over, there's one part of the proposal tonight is for a variation for the parking requirements for drive-through restaurants specifically. We'll go over that in just a moment here. One thing I also want to highlight, there's vegetation surrounding the site currently that was planted along with the original development of the Denny's, primarily non-native vegetation, including eucalyptus trees kind of around the periphery of the site. This application would, along with reconfiguring the entire parking and circulation, and introducing a central driveway there, relocating the building, or not relocating, it would result in the demolition of the existing building and the construction of a new building and a new location there. But landscaping would be used throughout, both for landscaping and aesthetic reasons, but also to help manage stormwater runoff. There'd be usage of bioswales, which is a fancy way of saying using landscaping to help control runoff and to soak it up and to sort of delay some of that peak runoff and storm events and that conveyance to the stormwater system. Getting into a little more detail here on sort of the layout of the building. Again, there's this outdoor seating area that would be covered by a louvered overhang that can be manipulated to allow either sunlight through or the roof can be fully closed off during wet weather events. Most of the interior of the building is dedicated to the kitchen and the working area, and there's obviously seating area provided as well. This also shows the location of some of the employee spaces, which are on the south side of the building there, as well as some pull-forward spaces in the drive-through queue. The queuing lane would provide 19 spaces, 2 of which are the pull-forward spots. Those are for folks with larger orders, or if there's some need to sort of expedite service, you can have patrons pull ahead and create more capacity there. There's also a refuse enclosure on the furthest south portion of the site, just adjacent to the sewage pump station. Maybe the most appropriate location for that refuse refuse structure there. There's also solar panels that would be placed over the refuse enclosure and over the a portion of the drive-through. The kind of getting into the architecture here and the overall design, I think one of the first things that stands out about this building, again, kind of a continuation of the extensive new landscaping, is the green roof itself. So the entirety of that roof over of the indoor seating area and the service area would be a green roof, which means that they're live plants that would be maintained. A question that came up in the prior Planning Commission meeting was just about, how to ensure maintenance of that, given that it's a living creature there, and not your typical roof panels. A condition of approval requires that that be maintained throughout. Also we're looking at the east elevation here, so this is kind of what you would see if you were standing across the street on Paradise Drive. You can see how that overhang kind of extends toward the street and sort of steps up the architecture, starts out with a lower roof element and steps up toward the primary structure. All the glazing would be transparent to provide natural light into the interior area. Looking from the west elevation, there's been a detail sort of pulled out here for additional clarity. There would be a fence along the highway frontage of the lot that would provide some screening of the structure. There would be plantings that would be integrated into that fence element to help soften it. It would be, I believe, sort of concrete panels that are designed to mimic wood panels, but they're more, they withstand the test of time. You can see one of the primary signage elements. You may have seen in prior iterations of the plans at the study session. For instance, there was a kind of a large water tower element that's consistent with the Roanoke Park location, which is the only other location of this business. That was removed. It was incompatible with the San Clemente Paradise specific plan, which, as well as the C3 zoning district and the general plan mixed use designation, is one of the sort of land use overlays that applies to this parcel. That sets a maximum amount of square footage for the signage, and that prior element did not comply. So what you see here is signage that does not exceed that maximum. So you have signage on sort of each elevation. This is the primary view that you'd see from the highway on the bottom here. Moving forward to the northern elevation, this is if you were entering from Tamalpais Drive, working your way south on Paradise. This is the entrance you'd see, again with the louvered shade structure to the left, and sort of that open truss design, I guess, with that dormer element sort of exposing part of that, the green roof. So it's really visible from all angles of the building. The southern elevation you see on the bottom wouldn't be really that easily seen, given that there's a number of trees with the sewage pump station to the south of the lot, but still kind of gives you an idea of what that might look like there. Moving forward, I just kind of went over the signage, but one detail here is that the primary identification signs have been circled here in orange. There are some additional signage elements that haven't been specified along the drive-through portion. Those would be brought back to staff to evaluate, and the intention there would not be for them not to be branded signage, but rather informational signage, kind of potentially explaining the architecture of the building, some of the sustainability principles that are in play to sort of allow the architecture to kind of further communicate to anyone on the site. This is just another rendering. There's a number of renderings that were available in the plans, but this sort of gives you a more kind of street level view of what that might look like. And again, with the significant landscaping that's been placed both around the perimeter of the site, on both the east and west side, also buffering between the drive-through lane and the parking lot to again sort of break up some of the hardscape and the visibility of cars in the parking lot. So moving forward to just talking about the process, because this is where it is a bit complicated. I hope you had a chance to review the staff report from the Planning Commission on May 8th. That has significant kind of analysis and description of the details and why staff believes that findings can be met, and also kind of the thought process into getting to the ultimate proposal for a zoning ordinance amendment. First, let's just go through the conditional use permit. So a typical restaurant would require a conditional use permit in the zoning district, and what that means is there's a list of uses broken out, as you can see here, in the zoning ordinance between each commercial zoning district, and that shows you this is a conditional use table. There's also a permitted use table, and it lists each type of use and whether it's permitted by right or whether it is potentially permitted through a kind of case-by-case evaluation with as you would have with a conditional use. So for instance, a restaurant without a drive-up window is a conditionally permitted use in all of the commercial districts. The proposal here is to make restaurants with drive-through lanes a conditional use in just the C3 district. So this is what that would look like in the zoning ordinance if the ordinance were introduced and ultimately passed. Kind of going back, one of the ways that you retain kind of discretion and are able to evaluate these things on a case-by-case basis is through the use of the conditional use findings, which sort of provide a framework for assessing an application. And so these things have to do with, is it consistent with the purpose of the zoning district? Is it consistent with the general plan? These are kind of fundamental questions that are required through these findings. To add that new use, specific findings, additional findings have to be met. Just to kind of summarize again, these are really about public health, safety, welfare, kind of fundamental concepts. Is it consistent with the general plan? Is it similar to other uses that are already conditionally permitted uses, such as a restaurant? So ultimately, we can kind of go into detail about these in just a moment, but that's the intention here, and these are the findings that would need to be made and that the Planning Commission made in recommending this zoning ordinance amendment. There were kind of a number of additional changes that would need to occur as well. Kind of the most basic is just adding a definition for a restaurant with drive-through. There's no mention of restaurants with drive-throughs in the zoning ordinance as is, so a new definition would need to be added. That's included in the ordinance amendment, obviously. Making it a conditional use, as we just showed in the table, literally adding it to the table. Also adding new standards for the use. That includes a parking standard. So one of the questions we asked in sort of assessing this was, do drive-through restaurants have the same parking demand as a restaurant that doesn't have a drive-through? Ultimately, the conclusion was, and what we see through in many other towns, is the understanding that if you have a drive-through, you're going to have some share of the patrons going through that and some share of them sitting down to eat and using the parking lot. So there's actually a proposal for a slightly reduced parking requirement of 1 space per 100 square feet of floor area, whereas the existing standard for restaurants without drive-throughs is 1 space per 75 square feet of floor area. And with the applicant's proposal of 47 spaces, that would meet that requirement while also providing additional spaces for employees. Some of the other standards for the use also include the requirement that the drive-through lane not require, that there be basically a separation between the drive-through lane and the parking, so that you can still maneuver in and out of the parking lot and access the drive-through lane, and that the two don't inhibit one another, and you have free flow of traffic. And additional conditional use findings, kind of as I showed before, there was the 3 conditional use findings that exist for all conditional uses. Certain uses, such as a liquor store, for instance, have additional supplementary conditional use findings. The applicant has proposed some supplementary findings. Staff has come up with some kind of alternative findings that are being put forth in the zoning ordinance amendment that the applicant also supports. And these include, we can kind of go through them briefly, but they include the requirement that traffic demand for the site not go directly through a residential neighborhood. These are sort of the same sorts of considerations that are already set forth in the conditional use permit findings, but kind of going that extra level and clearly stating what the desire is for a use like this. And one of those things is to avoid creating traffic on residential streets. So that would be one of the findings that's being proposed. We can go into some more detail in just a moment here on that. So kind of going back to this step. So because we have an application here for a conditional use, and because that conditional use is not currently permitted, the first step is asking whether that use should be added as a conditional use. And the way the zoning ordinance guides us through that process of trying to answer that question is through these findings here. So just to go through a couple, that the addition of the use will be consistent with the general plan and will be in accord with the purposes of the district. So we've already stated that the zoning district here is C3 highway commercial, the purpose of which is to provide for uses that cater to automobile use. It's pretty clear that a restaurant with a drive-through does just that, and is very similar to the existing uses such as restaurants, motels, automobile dealers, that sort of thing that are uses in the C3 district. Going through another finding here, that the use will not create more vehicular traffic than the volume created by uses presently on the list. Again, this is looking at how much traffic could be generated potentially by other uses that could go in this space, and comparing those things. In this case, when you look at another conditionally permitted use in C3, a service station with a mini mart, so we're talking about a gas station with a store as part of it, that would be generally expected on a site of this size and a development of this size to generate 190% roughly more traffic demand than a restaurant with drive-through. So kind of through looking at those other uses and comparing with the proposed use, we can conclude that this finding can be made. Kind of lastly, this question of, is this a use which is basically just incompatible with surrounding uses because of noise that it generates, or smoke, or vibration, or these other things that you see here. And staff believes there's nothing about a drive-through restaurant that is fundamentally incompatible with other uses presently on the list. And this and all findings here can be made. And we go into much more detail in the staff report, but happy to answer any questions you have on that.
Doug, I have a question for you.
Yes.
When we're talking about the drive-through, and personally, after looking at the staff report and everything else, I have no problem with the drive-through arrangement. However, what if years from now, Amy decides to close that space and another restaurant comes in, but for whatever reason it might be, the council at that time does not want a drive-through? Is there some sort of language that can be used so that it is on a case-by-case?
So I think an important distinction to make here is that the conditional use permit is about the use and not the operator themselves. So we look at the attributes of the user, the traffic that they generate, the amount of seating capacity they have, in this case even the amount of compostable and recyclable materials that they're using, those sort of things. And we're looking at the use and not the user. So I guess one scenario is you look at the applicant that we have now, but if they were to leave and we had someone else that wanted to go into that space within a limited amount of time there is to transfer from one use to another. But if the use was substantially similar and they were able to meet the specific conditions and size and all these other attributes that are related to the use, then that could potentially continue the use. So that's, I don't know
No, I think that's right. I mean, just to emphasize to your point, though, there are a number of things that are specific to this use that were included in the findings in order to make the findings for the conditional use permit and the supplementary findings, that if those things, as Doug mentioned, just couldn't continue if the next user of that site couldn't also operate in the same manner as stated in the conditions of approval, then they would have to modify that conditional use permit or come in and amend that at that time. So if there was more seats, if there was a change in the site plan, those sorts of things. If, for example, the green roof wasn't maintained, that's specified as a requirement in the condition of approval, that this is one of the reasons why, at least the Planning Commission recommended it and staff also recommended that this is acceptable here, were because of some of those features. And those relate to the actual specific findings that are required to be made in this particular case for the drive-through. So if those sort of features, and we could try to pull out more if that's needed, but if those weren't able to be maintained, then the use permit would not carry forward to that next user. However, if they were able to be maintained, then it could continue to another user.
Okay, so it's just basically, it can even rest on a stipulation of a detail, like the living roof or something like that. If somebody said they didn't want it, would that be ample enough to say, well, then you can't have the drive-through?
Right, and I think they would come back to have to modify that and see if the findings could still be made as a result of that inability to continue that particular aspect of the project. Another one that I think we're going to mention later, but speaks to the compostable nature of the products, which also is something that we thought was important as part of meeting the specific findings, that supplementary findings, and also the general findings for conditional use permit. But we wanted to add that, in a sense, partly for that reason, so that it was an important aspect of allowing this particular drive-through facility, or this particular drive-through use, I should say, but also recognizing that it may be difficult for other types of drive-through facilities in the future to meet that high standard. But that's what we're requiring.
Okay, so that kind of clears it up for me, that there are enough rules and conditions that it would still give a future council the latitude.
Well, it depends if they meet it or not. You know what I mean, so
Right.
somebody could come in and meet all those things.
Right, but if they didn't, what I'm saying is
Yeah.
if they didn't want to conform to the conditions of this particular applicant, that it leaves the council the latitude to say it doesn't qualify for a
Right,
drive-through.
they would have to come back in and seek a modification of that existing CUP, and through that process would be a reevaluation of the findings and whether that could be made or not.
Okay, great, thank you. Jim, did you?
He answered it in answering your question.
Okay,
All right.
anybody here? Yeah,
Now, are these questions just on the conditions, or any questions I have at this point?
You're free to ask any questions you'd like. I'm still working my way through this, but if
Okay.
you have questions on.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and start.
Yeah.
And if you want me to save a question for the next part of your presentation, that's
No,
fine.
I don't have any surprises built in.
Okay. Sorry. There was an EV station in the parking lot. Do we know what type of EV station? Is it going to be like a fast charge? I forget what it's called, a level something or other. Perhaps that might be a question for the applicant, unless it was something that was discussed in the planning commission.
Yeah, that detail I would defer to the
Got it?
applicant on that. But, yeah.
Okay. I noticed in the draft resolution, page 9, middle of the page, item number 10, plans submitted for building permits shall include 3 Class 1 bicycle parking spaces near to the surface entrance of the building. Is it intended for those to serve as employee parking for those staff members who want to ride their bike?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, because that was one of the recommendations that Fair and Peers made in their evaluation. Another recommendation that Fair and Peers made was to remove 4 or more on-street parking spaces in order to improve the sight lines for cars exiting. You don't want them pulling out right in front of a cyclist or another car. Were those red curbs Is it anticipated that we will have red curbs there?
So some of those details in the public right-of-way are to be determined.
Okay.
With basically, the effort is to, provide a crosswalk. There's no
Okay.
existing way to access the site as a pedestrian. So part of what the applicant is proposing is to include a crosswalk. So as part of that, and as part of, reconfiguration of the site as a whole, including the addition of a central driveway, that may include some requirement for modification of where existing parking spaces are located, and potential red curbing. But the actual fine detail of where that may occur or the quantity of spaces has yet to be determined. I think from our discussions, my understanding was estimated is maybe around 4 spaces that might be removed.
Okay.
But that'll be kind of evaluated, looking at how do we make it safe for pedestrians, how do we make it safe for cyclists, and how do we maintain, adequate sight lines for everyone.
Okay, and will the cost of the red curbs as well as the crosswalk and any ADA ramps that might be required for the crosswalk, will the cost of those be covered through impact fees or otherwise covered by the applicant?
Because the crosswalk is part of the applicant's proposal, that's, will be covered by
Okay.
the applicant.
Okay, good. Are you also considering what Fair and Piers recommended regarding the left turns and not allowing a left turn for the center driveway? Is that something that you're aware of and you're considering it?
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay. As for the signs, you had mentioned those 4 signs along the drive-through drive. The interpretive signs, I think, is what you call them. Are those going to have art or substance on the backside viewable from the freeway or from the freeway off-ramp?
No, I believe they'd be mounted to the east side of the fence and would only be viewable from the property or
Thank
from
you.
Paradise potentially.
Again, looking at the draft resolution, page 8, at the bottom, you don't have to necessarily turn to it, but it's item number 4. Under Planning Department plans, conditions of approval, it says, "An employee must manually take orders along the drive-through to facilitate expedited service during peak service hours." Do you actually mean somebody walking out there and literally taking orders?
Yes, it's my understanding that the existing operation Roanoke Park, they do this as a matter of course. It's part of how they take orders and how they expedite things.
Okay.
And there is a sort of a sidewalk built in next to the landscape buffer alongside the drive-through lane to facilitate that.
So it'll be safe for the employee, they won't be actually in the drive where the cars are driving, right?
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's designed to facilitate that and allow that to happen on a regular basis, so. And
Okay.
again, this is one of those things about a conditional use permit, the way that they're operating it, these sort of details that are within your purview.
Okay, has there been any discussion of any kind of guardrail or any kind of structure to actually protect the cars in the drive-through from vehicles that might be getting an accident on the freeway side? I know that's kind of a Caltrans question, I just,
Yeah,
was wondering if that had been
I'm not
discussed.
sure what is in place currently, or how the proposed fence would play a part in that, but,
I think it's also, there's one of the sections or elevations has where are we here? There we go. So that one on the upper one shows sort of the relationship between the highway. It obviously varies a little bit depending on where you are. It's a good question. I don't think we've actually looked at any sort of protective barrier, depending on, at least on the Amy side of it. And I can't recall exactly if there is any protection or guardrail or anything on the highway side, but it's something that could be discussed further with obviously with Caltran if need be. But obviously depending on whose property it's on, it's somebody, it's a separate process that we'd have to work on that with.
okay. For what it's worth, we are in discussions with Caltrans about some potential changes to Tamalpais Drive overcrossing, the off-ramp and the on-ramp. It would be really good for, and I'm looking at our Public Works Director back there too, Peter, for everybody to kind of be talking about that, because that might be something we could ask Caltrans for in the future. Let's see. I think that takes care of my questions. Thank you.
Thanks. Sloan, anything?
No.
Up to this point, are there any questions from the public, just related to what Mr. Bush has presented? Okay, then Doug, if you'd like to resume.
Alrighty. Yeah, so I mean, really there's some extensive detail in the staff report. Just trying to provide a general overview here. I appreciate the questions, and it sounds like you've had a chance to kind of look through the details here. I guess just to sort of wrap things up with our discussion of how we believe the findings can be met here. We kind of went through those findings that are required to add the use to the table, the conditional use table in the first place. And then there's these questions which we ask for, for each application for that. So if drive-throughs, restaurants with drive-throughs are a conditionally permitted use, and we receive an application as we have here, we go through these findings here. So we have the existing conditional use permit findings about whether it's consistent with the zoning ordinance, consistent with the general plan, and if it will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, and welfare. In addition to those, staff is proposing several additional findings, which include, as I mentioned before, that there would be a requirement that the actual drive-through lane itself be located in a place that makes sense with respect to neighboring properties. Are we looking at a property that's directly adjacent to, a sensitive use, a sensitive receptor, and has it been located in the most appropriate location? This is the kind of finding that when you start to look at other C3 parcels, it becomes clear that this really is a unique parcel because it doesn't have other uses that are immediately adjacent. It puts them at a position where they can meet these findings and operate a restaurant of this type without creating ill effect on neighboring properties. The other supplementary findings include the requirement for an independent transportation analysis to show that the drive-through lane will provide adequate capacity for a proposed use based on the attributes of that type of use and that user. And this is a situation here where we've utilized the services of Fair and Pierce traffic consultants to help inform this by both going out to the site itself and doing traffic counts, going out to the Amy's in Roner Park to look at their current traffic patterns, parking and drive-through lane demands, and applying that here. And in this case, this drive-through lane is really the largest that we know of in the region. Looking at other examples of McDonald's and Panda Express and some of the other ones in Marin County and Novato and Marin City, they range from anywhere from 5, 6, 7, like Panda Express, to 14 maybe in Novato at the In-N-Out, I believe, and this would have the capacity for 19 cars. So this is kind of going above and beyond what we would expect to be the demand for the drive-through, and which is why we believe this supplementary finding can be met. And then again, talking about the circulation, the separation between the drive-through and the parking lot itself. And here they have a design that does that. And that's part of the reason why they do have the 3 driveways. You have an exit for the drive-through, and then you have 2 ways to get in and out of the site otherwise to maintain adequate circulation. And then, of course, we have our design review findings and looking at the whole design of the site, of the structure, looking at it relative to other uses in that district. Ultimately, this is a very fresh design. The size of the building is quite a bit smaller than a lot of the development in the vicinity. It's a more compact space than what you see at the automobile dealerships, and it's really, it's around 4,100 square feet, and I believe the height is just around 26 feet. So it's a very modest-sized building with respect to other uses, other buildings in the vicinity, what we may see more typically in a commercial district. And really the scale, the way it's been stepped from the street, using the shade structure over the outdoor area, placing the outdoor seating area next to the street in the first place to kind of welcome people in and have, have someone who's riding their bike down the street or walking down the street be able to sort of interact with those who are, using the site, enjoying lunch or what have you. So it's been very, I would say the details of the design have been very deliberately laid out with respect to neighboring uses and trying to facilitate those values that come across in the general plan and the zoning ordinance for a site like this. So the signs are very reasonably, the size of them is very reasonable. The location of them is very practical. You have a sign over each entrance to kind of let people know that's where you get in the building. And ultimately, the materials and the detail in the landscaping, from the green roof to the bioswales to the use of landscaping throughout the site, it's been done with great sensitivity and real attention to detail. And it goes beyond, like I said earlier, beyond just planning for aesthetic reasons, but really planning for functional, to be part of the architecture and part of the function of the site. So it's a very, very high standard of design. And staff feels that all the design review findings can be made. The Planning Commission likewise was also very, very impressed by the design and very, very positive about the thought that went into it and the ultimate kind of design that you see here. It's also worth noting that this application went through the study session process with the Planning Commission in the fall and kind of when working with staff and really listening to the public and doing some really significant outreach, having meetings with local organizations and trying to find any opportunity to get feedback and figure out what works for this community and what do people want to see and how should this look and feel and operate. Really just a significant amount of effort on the applicant's part to ensure that this is the best development that it can be and is the most responsible, neighbor that they can be. So staff really feels as though these findings can be made, both the conditional use permit findings as well as the design review findings, and along with the Planning Commission recommends that the council, after consideration of all the feedback that you've heard and the presentations tonight, really adopt this resolution for the design review, street sign permit, and conditional use permit, and introduce the zoning ordinance, which would then come back for a second reading as a consent item at a future hearing, and then would go into effect 30 days following that. And there is one clarification I wanted to bring up as well. We kind of went over some of the conditions of approval, but there's also a detail in the zoning ordinance that I just wanted to call your attention to. Attachment 1. We just felt as though, strictly for clarity, that the definition should be updated to read where it says also referred to as drive-through restaurant. It should just be updated to read, in quotes, restaurant with drive-through, end quote, may also be referred to as a drive-through restaurant. It's a very small.
Forgive me, what page is
Where
that?
are you?
This is page 6 of the of attachment 1. Top of the page.
Oh, got it. Would you mind repeating what your recommended change is?
Yes. So in the proposed definition for restaurant with drive-through, the last line would be amended to read, restaurant with drive-through may also be referred to as drive-through restaurant. And what this does is just ensure that anywhere in the code that this kind of language would be found, that it would reference this particular use, that there would be no confusion there.
Okay.
That is hyper-technical.
Thanks, Doug. Before we come, go ahead, Adam.
Sorry, I just want to make sure you're aware. We also do have Fair and Peers here available to answer any. We knew that transportation-related issues would probably be front and center in this conversation, and leading up to the planning commission meeting and also with you. So we have Fair and Peers. They prepared several memos, which I think you've seen. They're available to answer questions. Peter Brown has also been very valuable in weighing in and providing input into the plan, and has been with us every step of the way along in the process and evaluating this project. So they're both available on any sort of transportation-related items you wish to speak about.
Okay, before we continue, I just would like to take a moment to offer compliments to everyone, Planning Commission, staff, Amy's. I think this is one project where the outreach was effective, and it was a project that everybody got to be on the same page. And I think that that Amy's, I want to really compliment them and thank them for really hearing what the Planning Commission and the residents had to say, because that's what, how we got to this point, a lot sooner than we might have otherwise. But I think it makes it for a really exciting project, a good project. It will surely, hopefully after tonight's vote, will be something that will be very visually positive. I thank all of you, sort of, for all the emails that I received. You certainly had a fan club in the last few days. I counted 112, and that was just in the last few days. We're not talking about way last week. So anyway, I think that everybody is responsible for that type of reaction. Staff, Planning Commission, Amy's, and all the residents who saw that really you come out and you have something to say, you have input, and you're heard. And I think that this was a project that just really exemplifies that. And I thank everybody. Okay, now back to business. Okay, folks, any comments on any of these things?
Well, I have some
Diane?
additional questions.
Sure.
So are we concentrating on the ordinance now or the whole project?
The whole ball of wax.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm not sure exactly where to direct my questions, so I'm starting with you, Doug. I'm sorry. What are the plans, or how can we deal with this situation if it turns out that this restaurant is a wild success and the drive-through queue backs up onto Paradise Drive?
Yeah, so I guess it's a good question, and it's one where, the fact that this is potentially a conditionally permitted use means that there are these findings that must be made, and these sort of operational standards that they must, adhere to. And if they go outside of that to the point where these findings can no longer be made, or if there are, let's just say, issues that, let's say, the way that the signage is directing folks in and out of a parking lot, or we see that a lot of people maybe making left turns and they didn't intend to, and there's some confusion there. That's the kind of thing that you can respond to by requiring changes in the signage or operational changes for them. The same way that we have someone that's required to take orders at times of high peak demand, implementing other conditions of approval like that to try to get the desired kind of compliance. But I would just say that the fact that it is a conditional use permit means that the town retains that discretion and that ability to hold them to the standards and the conditions that are in the resolution and the ordinance.
And just to add to that, the zoning ordinance actually has specific provisions as well. Section 1826.070. There are provisions in our conditional use permit section that allows us, if there are some real issues that arise down the road with public welfare, safety, nuisance issues, and so on, the CUP does have a provision that allows the Planning Commission basically to pull it let's reevaluate what we previously approved. One of the reasons why you have a conditional use permit is it relates to operation in the context and in the circumstances in which it was approved, but those things change over time, and things do change, and I think it recognizes that fact, and there may be unintended consequences, unforeseen things that come up, and so the ordinance does allow grounds for having another conversation with the applicant about potentially modifications to the project that may need to happen, changing the conditions under which that use is currently allowed. Even so far as, I know this has happened in the past in some certain cases, but there are and I would hope that some modifications or some solutions could be resolved, but revocation is a possibility at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you. Another concern of mine is that there are really very few bike racks. I mean, there's 2 bike racks, which does not seem to me to be adequate, especially for a restaurant like this, which will likely, attract a lot of young people, teenagers, maybe, folks for lunch that want to ride their bike over. Have you discussed what the options might be if there's a need to add additional bike racks?
What I can say is that there are kind of those two. There's the racks that are shown in the site plan. I think the plan is to provide for 14 bike spaces, not including the 3 additional kind of protected
For staff?
for staff. So it's like a total of 17 bike spaces. I would, in a sense, I would think that it would behoove the applicant to try to accommodate folks if they see it at some point that that's not meeting the demand. But they're meeting that baseline requirement from the town, which is to provide those spaces, and then going a bit beyond by kind of following the recommendations of Fair and Peers as far as the protected bike spaces as well.
Good, okay.
Yeah.
And by the way, what is a Class 1 bike space?
It's lockable and effective.
Thank you, in the bike box? Got it. And then, for those that might be listening from home and didn't hear that, the Class 1 bike parking that will be kind of behind by the service entrance that is anticipated for employee parking is a bike box, and it's lockable, as opposed to just the rack that the patrons likely use. And then finally, I just wanted to say I would encourage Amy's to look at a fast EV charge. You don't want somebody parking their EV there and hanging out for 4 hours, waiting for their electric vehicle to charge. Best to get a fast charge so you can get some turnover, and I think that would be a good addition for the town. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jim?
I have a question related to traffic. Assuming you're at, say, Cove School or Marin Country Day or something like that, and you decide to drive over to Amy's and go through the drive-through, what would be your exact path? Where are you going to be doing right turns? Where are you going to be doing left turns?
Well, I think the easiest way would be to left on Paradise, at the intersection of San Clemente and Paradise, if you go there.
And then another left.
And then a left into the drive-through,
Okay.
which is the northernmost driveway. That would be what I'm trying to get to where
Right.
we go. Yeah, so I would expect you would, at the intersection down here, make a left, come in and hit the drive-through, come back, and then come back out that way.
Okay.
Do you have anything else, Jim?
Not right now.
Okay, Sloan? Okay, neither do I. We will open it up for public comment. And if I could ask you, how many people are planning to comment? If you'd raise your hand.
Hey, Carl, it's a good point. The applicant may want to say something.
Oh, why do they need to say that? Okay. Does the applicant care to say anything? Please, go ahead. I'm sorry. We're just trying to, to expedite everything. Yes, thank you.
I'm going to put our presentation up. Yeah.
Okay, hi, I'm Andy, and this is my wife Rachel, and we founded Amy's Kitchen 30 years ago, and those are some early pictures. The far right is when we were thinking about having a baby, I guess. And then when she was deep into her pregnancy, she asked me to start cooking, and I didn't have much capacity for that, so I tried to buy some natural organic meals, and they weren't very good. So that's where the idea sprang, to start a company that made great tasting meals with organic ingredients. And that's Rachel at the stove with little Amy, and Rachel's mom with Amy, and that's our first pot pies. Okay. Next. And we served at the drive-thru very.
Talk about how we got this started.
Well, yeah. And we started the drive-through because our consumers kept asking for it. The consumers kept us in business for years. We didn't make any money, but they kept asking us to keep making this great food. So we did. And then after a few years, they started saying, please, can you open a drive-through? Because our kids want to go like every other kid, but we don't want to bring them to blank and blank and blank. So we thought about it for years, and we finally did it. And it was a total, change of business for us, but it's been a wild adventure, but it's been very, very successful. And it's just regular, understandable foods like burgers and shakes and lemonades and burritos and pizza and macaroni and cheese and beautiful salads. And it's all organic. And Paul will explain the carbon footprint is minimal, and everything's compostable, 100% of our packaging. Okay. Your turn.
So what's really exciting about this project and this restaurant that we have is that we're able to provide food for so many different kinds of people, old people, young people, people with allergies, people that are on vegan diets. So every product you can get gluten-free, dairy-free, and everything is organic. And I really don't know any restaurants anywhere that have all organic food. And we keep the prices affordable so that, people can eat healthy food, and they have an opportunity to take their kids and their families to a place that is enjoyable and where they can get healthy food. And what I'd really like to say is that we also have been getting a lot of letters from people asking us, when are you going to open in Corte Madera? And everywhere I go, and anyone I know, and so many emails. And so I'm really hoping that tonight I will have an answer for them. So that's all we have to say.
I'll just say one more thing, is that it's a very happy place. I don't know how many of you visited, but you just come in the door and people are happy. Everyone I bring there says, how come everybody's so happy here? It's just a great atmosphere, a family place, and fun.
Yeah, we one of the emails said, well, we were the first place to have Amy's in Roanoke Park, and they were writing to somebody in Corte Madera. I said, and we think that you will also really enjoy having it in your community. So that's how they own it, and they're just happy for you.
And now Paul, who also is my nephew, is in charge of corporate development for
Yes, we
Amy's.
are a family business, and we don't plan on selling. So just
Oh, hi, Paul.
Hi. Good to see you, and thank you for having us tonight. Thank you, Andy and Rachel. I'm going to go really quick because I've been told multiple times to be brief tonight, but if you have further questions, please continue to ask them. As you've said yourself, we've done a lot of community outreach. We've gotten a lot of questions. There's a few things that came up very often, like, when are you going to be open, which is 7 a.m. to 11? When are you busy? Saturdays, kind of middle lunch Saturdays is definitely our peak period. We are a little busier when school is out. We're a little less busy when school's in session. We do get a lot of families there during the summer. We have a very good balance of drive-through and restaurant. So even though we are a drive-through restaurant, we're also a people restaurant where you can come in and enjoy the patio. We have a little fun play thing for the children to use. And it's a nice environment that can be a good sense of place, as well as a convenient option of a drive-through. We have a really wonderful base of employees, which is partly what makes the restaurant so fun and enjoyable. They're students and they're professionals and they're artists. I mean, you get this just blend of kind of part-time who are pursuing career goals, full-time who really want to be in the restaurant industry, and they make the environment what it is. And we also have a lot of unique programs such as commuter benefits we offer employees, which again make us a very unique place to work. Andy briefly touched on this, but one thing that we really pride ourselves on our sustainability mission. It's one of our core kind of values and principles of the organization. So when we created this restaurant, we wanted to make sure we were doing right. So we did an exhaustive study with a third-party consultant to look at the overall carbon cost of a meal at Amy's, and we found that we're less than half of a traditional sort of drive-through or fast food restaurant, and even about half of a normal restaurant for getting the drive-through. And a lot of that just is about the quality of the organic ingredients, the vegetarian nature of the food, and just all of this, the accumulation of all those small choices we make to do something special. And I also want to just touch on idling because that's come up a lot. And we've actually found that idling is less than 3% of the sort of greenhouse gas impact of a meal. And that's even if you have a car that idles. With electric cars and hybrids and stop-start today, it's actually probably less than that. But we kind of did this study assuming everyone drives a traditional gas-guzzling, non-start-stop type of car. The other thing we did, which we're very proud of, is we've moved to 100% compostable packaging. This is not an easy thing to do today. This is a very young industry. In some cases, we actually had to buy 3 years worth of packaging just to get the scale to allow to get a vendor excited to do this for us. But today, we're really proud to say that we don't create trash in our restaurant anymore, which again is something that's very special. I won't touch a whole lot on the open house. We had about 200 people come up to Rohnert Park from the community to enjoy the food, show them the plans, get to know them better. We also met with a whole bunch of different groups, made some new friends in Corte Madera. We actually fed the Lions Club, which was a lot of fun, and it was a good event. And ultimately, we have over 1,100 local community members who've signed up online as support. I'm sure some of them have emailed you, as you stated. And I think that, just the process of getting to know the community here has been really wonderful. And we're thankful for it. We have a much better project because of it. So with that being said, I'm just going to turn it over to our architects, Andrew and Zoe, who are going to go very fast through their part.
Thank you.
Sure.
And he can talk fast. So we're going to be adopted by the family. We're not in the family yet. But we've thoroughly enjoyed working with them. I'm Andrew Dunbar. I'm an architect, and this is Zoe Estercon. She's my partner in the firm. I'm an architect. She's a landscape architect. It is a San Francisco-based firm. We're local, and we have been integrated practice for 25 years working here. And that integration is part of what we really wanted to bring to the building and the landscape, working that design together. So that involved a lot of different stages in the design process. A lot of it was about making a place that was special for the restaurant, but also one that engaged the parameters of the site and made this a better place in situ of where it was, but also that the restaurant would function even better for the shape and size of the site and how it was against the freeway. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the siting. I'm going to turn over to Zoe, the landscape architect in the firm, and then I'll get back on a little bit on the building.
You can keep flipping.
I'll flip.
Yeah, next one. So thanks to Doug Bush's introduction to the project. I don't think I have to say very much, but I just wanted to emphasize that we worked really hard, I think, to make sure that we took into consideration all of the context of the site, which he had mentioned, from the transportation network to looking at where the prevailing winds are coming from, adjacencies, solar exposure, making sure that this project was a comfortable and wonderful place to be ultimately, and it fit very well into the town of Corte Madera as also a very wonderful place to be. So we wanted it to rise to that. At the scale of the site, you see there's impacts from the freeway, the noise, the prevailing wind direction, views to and from the property, which we thought were really important to both take advantage of, but also to understand in detail, adjacencies across Paradise Drive, and even the orientation to the bay, the proximity to the bay and the opportunity that brings with it. So when looking at the building that was there, we really questioned whether it was on the right part of the site. We moved the building location to the south, made sure that the outdoor dining area was sheltered by the building, made sure that the queuing made sense on the site, especially, and that it lends itself, in fact, to screening the site from the noise, putting in landscape buffers that were really effective both for cars and for people, and preserving many of the trees on the site, the mature trees that we could, even though we were reorganizing the way the parking and circulation worked. And here you see the site plan. I know you have all of the details right in front of you, but if there are any questions about it. We just wanted to make sure that it was a really safe and easy place to be, and then also that ultimately that it's enjoyable for the customers of Amy's. So, Andrew will talk a little bit more about the building design.
I think it's been very well presented already, so there's not much to talk about. I think we looked for a very articulated structure, something that did step its massing, both in terms of porosity and shadow, the thinness, and a sort of extended stance of the building. The green roof being a major feature, its ability to present itself as a sort of a larger floor mass in the building, and then there's the later building begins to dissolve and break down into the landscape, as you can see by the pergola, which is on the side as it steps down towards the street. The signage was quite particular. We decided to change the building structure and make it quite different for Corte Madera. We used dormer, something which is a little more frontal to the freeway, but also to the larger town across the freeway, and gave us a place to put the signage and gave us a chance to actually show that roof in better light in terms of the freeway in the north-south direction that we do cross it on. There's also the signage, the monument sign, which we began to customize and look, to begin to bring in some of the features that are evident here. This is from the freeway. These are just some views that weren't shown directly in the presentation previous to it, but you can see the articulation, the sort of the rhythm of structured materials that are at the scale of the human hand and breaks down the building mass. This is the view coming due south, the same way on the freeway, and the view coming along Paradise Drive, going north. And there a view that we've just seen, but also the view directly approaching the building. A lot of time and energy was spent sort of making sure that the pedestrian experience on the parking was always sort of being drawn into the building. The building extends its materials out, and sort of paths that are very clearly separated from other parts of the site and from cars, so that the pedestrian was always in the landscape moving towards a garden environment that surrounded the building. And here we are on Paradise Drive looking at that side, which is where the bike parking is, and also the side that is probably most approachable from a pedestrian point of view, and this is probably where the crosswalk will be best placed. A lot of time and energy was spent in the sustainability, the way that the building and the landscape both work together in a kind of synergistic way to offer as many features that are not only sustainable but also reparative. I think we've gone into a few of them, but around the corners or the edges, you see all the other ways. It self-generates its own energy, it takes care of its own water, it provides habitat and electrical, and it gives back directly to the users. I think that's pretty much it for our presentation. Questions?
Thank you. Any questions?
I've got a couple.
Okay, Jim?
Yes.
Yes.
Let me see, thinking of the bicycles in particular, what sort of security system do you have? Because in a lot of the public spaces in and around Corte Madera, if you park your bicycle, whether it's there when you come back is questionable.
So I'm a big biker.
Okay.
So I worry about that a lot. One of the best security systems we have is eyes on the bikes.
Okay.
And that is why they are parked directly in front of the main entrance and also directly below the ability for everyone who's sitting in there. You can see the people behind there looking directly at them. They're in plain view of the street,
Okay.
which helps a lot. So there's passing cars. And the close to Class 1 bike parking is locked and weatherproofed.
Mhm.
Do you have something else to mention?
No, and I was just going to say that the racks themselves are planned to be, what would I say, hefty racks as well. I mean, I think that's an important thing, that the racks are tamper-proof and sturdy,
Okay.
easy to maintain.
And they're also the type that let you park a number of, for instance, I have 2 kids and we all go biking together, so there's 4 of us arriving at a place to park our bikes. And we're able to stack 4 on one. If you know how to do it, you just go, and we loop them all the way through, and that gives us a lot of security. We lock the wheels on.
Okay, good.
Is that it?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Have you thought about where you might expand your bike parking if there's such a demand? And I'm wondering if you could answer my question about the EV charger.
Yeah, you'll have to do that one. We did, the bike parking is expandable, so we've kept it to what we sort of consider a bike plaza in front of the stairs that are the approach to the patio, but there is some expandability to either side of where we have it planned. So
Okay.
that's,
There's also the front plaza's possibility.
Mhm.
So, did you want to answer the EV?
I'm actually a recent EV owner, so it's personal as well as as business. But what we use in Rohnert Park today are 32 amp charge point stations, but they're free to the user, though you still have to kind of do the little swipe in process. I think the fast chargers are interesting, but there's some compatibility issues now. I mean, clearly we're not going to get a Tesla supercharger, I don't think, on our site, and that might not be worth it. And I think this is the change. There's another one, but I know it doesn't work with my car, for example. So I think most likely we're going to stick with the 32 amp, which are not the fastest, but they're not the slowest. And but we're willing to look at suggestions. It's just that I think for us, compatibility, that every car could use it, is going to be our kind of primary factor. And then as fast as we can make it work with current technology.
Currently, people are not misusing.
Yeah.
One time we had somebody that was working.
Yeah.
You know what?
Rachel?
Oh yeah. I can tell this.
Rachel, do you want to step up and?
I can just tell the story real
Okay.
quick. But yeah, we've it's natural that you get a few people who park and want to stay there all day, and we've just been cool about it. We go out and talk to them. We explain the reason behind it, and I think it's never been an issue. We did have, as Rachel said, somebody I think worked at Home Depot, or we had somebody, and we just we talked to them. And ultimately just being nice people, we're able to kind of help them understand how we need to do it. We never had to take it farther than that. But yeah, it's important that it's there for customers for the 30 minutes to an hour while they're there on site. So.
Okay, thank you. Is that it from up here? Okay,
Oh, actually, may I ask one other question?
sure.
I'm wondering if you have anticipated that there will be a shift change at any particular time of day, or if your employees kind of come and go at different times.
Sure, I can speak to that. It's more of a gradual kind of phasing in and a gradual phasing out. There's clearly after the core peak hours, there's a little bit of a quicker phase out, but it's a bit also dependent on how busy the store is. So it's not like all of a sudden we hit 2 p.m. and the whole restaurant turns. It's more of a kind of gradual ebb and flow.
Okay, thank you.
I do have one question, Carla, if you don't
Yes.
mind. If the stars align, what's your tentative plan for when you'd be open for business?
It's a good question, and we've tried not to put the cart before the horse, and really, so there's still some work we need to do in terms of finalizing all the plans and structural engineering and building permits and whatnot. And you probably are aware, it's not the easiest current construction climate to find a lot of free contractors who are ready to go. But that all being said, we're hoping for a kind of late, probably fall 2019 opening if all goes well.
And how long do you anticipate construction to take, approximately?
I bet Angie, who's kind of helping lead the development, would probably be the best person to answer, but what do you think, 9 months to a year?
Aggressively 6, but probably 9.
Probably 9 months.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and then if there are no other comments, we are open for public comment. And if you would limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. And if you do have comments, if you wouldn't mind queuing up, because otherwise we lose time. And so if we aren't queued, I have to cut it off because I won't think anybody else wants to speak. So, Mr. McPherson, would you like to start off, please?
I'd be happy to start off. David McPherson, 25-year resident of Corte Madera, and before I mention anything about Amy's, I just ran into Bob Ravazio at the town center, who was actually anxious to be here tonight. When I remarked about how well he was walking, he quickly chipped in that he'd be doing much better if he wasn't forced to wear the Birkenstocks that were purchased by Pat. So he's doing particularly well. His sense of humor is as keen as ever, and he's looking forward to serving. I'm not going to mention too much about the architecture and the business practices of Amy's, particularly when it comes to their carbon footprint. I think many other people will comment upon that, and I'm obviously impressed, but really approach this more from a standpoint as a bicycle pedestrian transit advocate. So I wanted to let you know that myself and other people involved in that kind of advocacy thought that it would be more appropriate if there were only 2 driveways instead of 3. But that really approached it from a really simplistic standpoint of trying to minimize conflict between cars entering and leaving and bicycles and pedestrians. And after listening to the presentations and looking better at the dimensions and looking at the elimination of blind spots by some of the parking spaces that'll be removed. At least for myself, I think that the 3 driveways are appropriate and will make for a better flow of traffic and will be adequately safe for pedestrians and cyclists. The second thing that we wanted to do is to take a really good look at the width of Paradise, because there is just minimal parking on the west side. I think there's only going to be 7 spaces after the spaces are eliminated to prevent the blind spots on the driveways. So, you know, it seems to a bicycle pedestrian advocate that what you would want to do is to eliminate those 7 spaces and have the space to have a Class 1 protected lane going along the west side and then shared space on the east side. But again, I think taking a step back, and particularly with an eye towards the Corte Madera connector, the bicycle pedestrian path and plan that cantilevered off the bridge, I think if the stars line up and that is progressing, and it's clear that the circulation between the village and Amy's and the west side of Corte Madera is all progressing, I think by then, 2 years from now, or 2.5, 3 years from now, the road will be more ready to be repaved in any event, and we can take a good look at whether or not that's an appropriate time to eliminate those spaces and improve the bicycle traffic. So that's all I had to say. I hope you approve it. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Next, Patty?
Patty Stolier, 1411 Casa Buena Drive. And first, I want to say I really, really miss Denny's, so I'm so happy that a restaurant is coming there. As a poor old grandma, it was a wonderful place for kids and for old people, so I'm really, really excited about Amy's coming. Also, I live directly across the street, so we get the view of the Amy's sign from our house. I also have friends that live in Santa Rosa, and I've been envious of them for a long, long time that they've got an Amy's and we don't. So thank you. And I don't know if you should give up on the Tesla charger. You can walk to the Tesla dealer from there, so you could maybe a buy one, get one kind of thing where they give you the charger and you give traffic to the Tesla dealer, so think about that. But mainly my question is, what percentage of the business is drive-through and what percentage is seating? Because it looked like, from what Doug said, it was mostly the kitchen, and I wondered what the seating was inside, if it was adequate for people that aren't driving through. That's all.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Can I answer that question? No.
No?
Save
We'll
up all the
come back
questions.
to that.
Good evening. David Kuhnhart, 141 Hill Path. Because there's perhaps a 25% chance that I may have a role in the future decisions on this project, I thought my opinion might matter tonight. And my opinion is 2 thumbs up to the food, the operation, the family, and the design. I wanted, because going through planning school a long, long time ago, we were adamantly opposed to drive-throughs and curb cuts all the time where there are pedestrians. This site is almost unique in that it's an island. It's a pea pod shape island which has no direct adjacencies and almost no pedestrian traffic. And you know, I think that the issue of the ratio of drive-through and sit-down will be naturally taken care of. If there's a queue that's building up on the northern edge of that pea pod, people will just go into the regular parking and walk in and pick up their food that way. Most drive-throughs, there's conflict between pedestrian and traffic, and you're taking at least 2 right-angle turns around a building, and they're poor visibility, and it doesn't work. This is unique, and it's very smooth, and I really can't wait till they bring their wonderful menu to town. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, I will close it to public comment. And can I ask either you, Doug, or you, Paul, because I know it's in staff report and I don't want to leaf through it, but what the seating capacity is inside?
I believe it's a 60-80 split. There's 60 seats inside and 80 outside.
Okay, great.
I just want to explain real quick that the 80 outside, the majority of those are under that louver system, which actually can completely seal to the rain. We have some kind of canvas type drop down shades with heaters in there. So it's actually a really pleasant outdoor experience even when the weather isn't great. So even though 60 is the technical amount in the restaurant, there's actually quite a bit more that are still very comfortable in any type of weather.
Great.
And just in terms of, actually, sorry, the last part of our question, it's about half and half. So half drive through and half dine in terms of how our restaurant works.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, and we'll bring it back to council. We have both in front of us ordinance number 976, and we have resolution 22/2018.
I'm happy to start with discussion.
Thank you.
I will echo what Patty said, that I think there are a lot of folks in town that miss the Denny's and would love a restaurant in that location. I think Amy's is a good fit. It's a good product. Obviously, the emails that I've been receiving are overwhelmingly in favor. In fact, I don't know that I got a single one against.
Not
so
one.
Congratulations on that. That never happens. I am concerned about the concept of a drive-through. I personally would much prefer something like a drive-in, a drive-up, where people could order on an app and the food is brought up to them, or they get a text message when their food is ready and they can go to a window and pick it up. I don't like the idea of the cars queuing up and idling, because let's face it, not everybody has an EV or a hybrid. And I'd like to explain the basis for that concern of mine. I went up to Amy's one day last September, so this is before the fires. It was September 14th. I went up to the Rohnert Park location. I arrived, it was a Thursday, so I arrived at 12:34, so it was in the middle of the lunch peak. I parked in a parking space and watched a particular car enter the queue and timed until how long it took for him to get out. And it was 17 minutes. That is a very long time to be idling in a queue for food. Now, and then I went in, by the way, and ordered. So I got in line to order at 12:56. I got my food delivered to me at my little table in 13 minutes. So it was actually quicker for me to do that than the drive-through. I believe your food is made to order. That's how you can do the gluten-free option or the dairy-free option or whatever options. And that's a big appeal. So I would like to strongly recommend that you keep an eye on what the impacts are to the neighborhood. And if you find that the queue is not moving as quickly as you'd like, maybe you need to send a person out there to take orders earlier, even if it's not backing up onto Paradise. Because I think that's something that the community would like to see. I mean, heck, people are on their lunch. They don't want to spend 17 minutes in the line. And it could be that I was there on a day that was just a little bit of a hiccup. But I would also like to say to our planning department that that is something I would like our staff to be aware of as well. I also would like Amy's to understand that we do have a lot of traffic in this town. We are a small town, and many of our roads were designed decades ago, and traffic on them is much greater than what many of these roads were designed to handle. For instance, I live on the bay side of town, and lately, in the last couple of years, we've been getting big backups on Paradise Drive, on San Clemente, at Redwood Highway. So it's right across from Macy's, you know where that stoplight is. So that's the route that your patrons as well as your staff will likely take if they want to get to the freeway. That backup happens every afternoon during the school year from about 3:10 to about 3:30. I think it's mostly due to parents picking up their kids. We've got 3 significant schools on the east side, plus a bunch of preschools. We've got a public elementary school. We've got a private elementary school, plus Montessori is, I guess, both preschool and elementary, I think, something like that. So it would be best to avoid an employee shift change between 3 and 3:30, I would think. If you could do that, that would help. That being said, I will support this. I look forward to you coming to town, and I'll see you next September.
Okay, any other comments?
I guess I'm going to say that I would support it. I do believe that the additional supplemental findings that they have on the ordinance are good, but I would like to add 2 more. Or one would be the entrance is not within 500 feet of an adjacent property. And secondly, that it's not located along an important crosstown travel route, which I'll just list out. East to west would be Tamalpais Drive. North-south would be Corte Madera Avenue to Magnolia Avenue, Madera Boulevard to Tamil Vista Boulevard, San Clemente Drive to Redwood High. And I'm just talking about putting it in the ordinance, so that if someone down the line comes along and says they're willing to do a traffic study, just tell them not to waste their time on those streets.
May I ask a question, Jim?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have a question
Yes.
first, Diane.
Okay.
The 500 feet, again, you said that was to,
Basically, I'm thinking if a drive-through is there and they spill over into the street, I don't want them blocking a neighboring parcel's driveway. Okay? And then the second one is, there are certain streets that if somebody, the queue spills over into the street, it will impede traffic across town. And I just want to sort of take that possibility off the table right now.
okay, can I, before your comment, Diane, I was just gonna ask staff if you had any comments on that
Sure.
recommendation.
I'm trying to, so the second one, if I'm understanding it correctly, and I didn't catch all of the different corridors that you mentioned, but I believe either all of them or most of them aren't in the same areas where C3 zoning currently is located. So there's no possibility with the ordinance in place that even if there was another location where there was a drive-through, that any entrance or exit could be on those streets. But if you repeat them, we could confirm, because we can go to those.
Okay. Madera Boulevard, Tamil Vista, basically by Town Center all the way up.
Right, no,
Okay.
there's no C3 there. We could go, let's go, do you have the mouse? Oh, we have to get the other, go ahead, keep going.
Okay. Corte Madera Avenue, Magnolia, that's residential pretty much. And then San Clemente Drive, Redwood Highway.
C4 is over there, there's only C3 on the east side of the highway is this site.
Okay. And where's the other C3 in town?
It's Casa Buena and then Pfeiffer, up at there, those are the locations, so.
Okay.
I think that one, that would solve that concern, and then the other one was an entrance or exit within 500 feet of an adjacent property?
Yeah.
Or property driveway.
And is that,
Property's driveway.
The property driveway,
Yeah.
not the property.
okay, and, I mean, we we looked at, I guess one of the things, I guess I would ask for the purpose of that requirement. We did look at a bunch of different factors and not only the standards, but the additional findings, queuing length, et cetera, are all baked into the findings, so that if there was a problem or whatnot, or if there's a future problem, those could be addressed through the conditional use permit. You know, one of the things we looked at originally was there may, in fact, from a land use standpoint, be a perfectly compatible site with another adjacent use, as long as it meets all the findings and without sort of having a specific justification for a rule such as a certain distance from another one. It seemed to be lacking sort of the land use basis that we would want to sort of support a rule that outright just limited things in that way, in that manner. So we did consider some of those, but at the end of the day, we felt that it was more appropriate to look at the actual causes or potential issues that could result from the use, and try to address them through either the standards or supplementary findings. If there's something that wasn't addressed or you felt wasn't addressed through those conditions or standards, and that's why you're proposing this, maybe we can try to discuss that. But I guess I'm not certain is it anticipating that there will be backups onto the street and therefore there's conflicts of getting into an adjacent property?
I'm just worried that, you know, the senior class of Redwood High all decides to go to the dinner at lunchtime and it backs up on Paradise, or we open another restaurant somewhere in town, and
Right.
I don't know what would qualify, but just,
And it would prevent access to an adjacent property,
yeah.
ingress, regress?
And I'm thinking of complaints that folks up around.
Yeah, I mean, I
Maryland
think this
and
speaks
so
to
on.
sort of one of the things that Diane had asked earlier. You know, we've done certain traffic analyses and studies to make sure that the site plan, we believe, meets a peak demand at this point for the queuing and even peak times parking. We recognize there may be need to park on the street at certain peak times. The vast majority of times that wouldn't happen. But if we are tremendously off in that analysis, I think there is the ability to call that question in and say there is a public concern about public safety or public welfare or issues on adjacent properties, but we don't anticipate that at this point. So from staff's perspective, to anticipate problems, by having a rule that says it just can't be located within 500 feet of another entrance would sort of, it sort of raises questions that we have the correct rules in the first place. I think it sort of blows up the rationale that we were trying to create with the traffic analysis and the other things that we've done to as best we can, evaluate the adequacy of the site plan and the parking and the queuing. But I'll leave it at that and let the council take it from there.
Okay.
Okay, Adam, Doug, thank you for your typically good and thorough work. I appreciate the diligence you put through and also sort of intellectually honest about the way you approach it. Amy's, thank you very much for a good project and application. We think you have an honorable concept. We're happy to have you here. We welcome you in every possible way. Our problem is not that we don't love Amy's. We love Amy's. The problem we have is that we're worried about the precedent, right? We're worried about, are we opening the door to other drive-throughs? Are we opening the door to projects that are not as sustainable or as that have huge carbon footprints or that misuse what would otherwise be a very thorough involvement in the community that you've demonstrated to take advantage of the situation and ruin our community, not make an effort to improve it. That's what we're really concerned about. What if Amy's sells in 2 years? What if another restaurant comes in and says, why can't we have the sorts of things that you gave Amy's to our place? And they're not going to be as friendly to our community. So that's what I think we're worried about, right? Anyway, so I think the Planning Commission, who also did great work, Peter, you're in here somewhere. Nice work, my friend. Did good work kind of ferreting this out, I think, as being solved by the specific findings. Not only does this only apply to, Adam, it's C3, is that right? So it's only C3 zoned areas, and there's these additional findings you've got to make for this project, which include things like low impact to the community, this sort of complicated transportation analysis, the uniqueness of your project, the comportment with the general plan proposals. So all these things, the sustainable, low carbon footprint and so forth, these are the sorts of things that make it the kind of project that we like and that we can insist in the event there were future projects requested comply with that sort of perspective as well. I mean, that's my own sense. You guys agree with that, right? So I can make those findings. So long as they're conditioned in that way, the conditional use permit and so forth. And I'm happy to make the motion unless you have other things that you want to.
Diane, did you want to say anything?
No, my questions were answered, so
Okay.
go for it.
Yeah, and I just to add to what you said, Sloan, was that I feel that the words have really been parsed well in this. And it's hard for me to envision if Amy's does decide to close for whatever reason, that there's not going to be another restaurant coming in that is going to offer a landscaped roof. I just don't think we're going to see that again. And so if it's something like that gives back to a future council the power to say, we don't want to drive through, that would stand up, that would hold up. So with that, Sloan?
Go ahead.
Actually, may I?
Yeah, take your time.
I changed my mind. May I say one thing? Jim, I appreciated what you were doing, but sorry, I think Adam kind of convinced me that we got those things covered. I think the fact that allowing a drive-through is limited to the C3 zoning really kind of helps tremendously in ensuring we don't have those traffic impacts in our major corridors such as Tamla Vista and the other ones you mentioned. And then as for the adjacent driveways, again, I'm convinced based on my question about what would happen if the drive-through queue spills out and causes traffic or neighborhood impacts, that is also covered simply by the nature of this being a conditional use and the conditions that have been put on it. So anyway,
Is that fair?
sorry, Adam convinced me.
Okay, thanks, Diane, for those comments. Okay.
Okay, I'll make a motion. But before I do that, I think the title of our resolution's messed up.
Well, wait, we're not there. Let's do the ordinance.
We'll do the first reading of the ordinance after we approve the resolution, right? Who cares? You want to do the ordinance
Well, it
first?
was just, I was doing it in
Sure, okay.
order.
I will move that we introduce first reading of ordinance number 976 with the amendment which appears on page 6 of the ordinance at section 18.04.661, restaurant with drive-through, slightly modifying the definition in the last sentence.
I'll second.
Councilmember Andrews?
Yes.
Councilmember Bailey?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio? Vice Mayor First?
Yes.
Mayor Condon?
Yes.
Okay, before I move that we approve resolution number 22-2018, my copy says in the last line, for the construction and operation of Amy's Drive-Through Restaurant Lane at 5839 Paradise
Oh,
Drive.
yeah.
What should it say like in the title? What should it say? You see the title there, Doug?
It should say, for the construction and operation of Amy's Drive-Through Restaurant, or it should be either Amy's restaurant with drive-through lane, or just Amy's drive-through restaurant.
So just take out the word lane.
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'll move that we approve resolution number 22/2018, approving a design review application, sign permit, and conditional use permit for the construction and operation of Amy's drive-through restaurant at 5839 Paradise Drive.
Second.
Councilmember Andrews?
Yes.
Councilmember Bailey?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio? Vice Mayor First?
Yes.
Mayor Condon?
Yes.
Good luck and God bless.
Good luck. Okay, folks, we'll resume here.
I know.
And if we can make
You're phrasing too.
our budget hearing as fun and exciting as our last application, that would be really super. So let's see here. Okay, so we're now at 5.1.2, and this is our public hearing for review of proposed fiscal year 2018-2019 capital improvement program. And would you like to start off, Peter?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, members of the
Yes.
council, if I may, just so you know, no pressure tonight. This is staff's best effort to get you the capital improvements budget, our operating budget, as well as the sanitary district budget in front of the council and out to the community for as long as possible before you're asked to approve it. So tonight is a draft. We're asking for feedback from you and the community, and we'll come back to you at the next meeting and ask you for consideration of approval of the next 3 items. And with that, I'll turn it over to Peter.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Cusimano. Madam Mayor, members of the council, Peter Brown, Public Works Department. I think that what I can do really briefly here is just kind of go over some of the highlights of what we did. I'd also like to thank Lorena Barrera and Jared Barrio for contributing to the drafting of the capital improvement program. I understand from staff that we really haven't had a program like this. It really outlines the purpose, what we're doing, how it was developed, and then again at the end lists the projects by category that we anticipate over the 5-year period. So I think the staff report kind of outlines that, and what we're looking to do is get your input on the projects that are in there. Do they look like the right projects? Are there projects that we're missing that you know of that are in need of town capital investments? Those are all things we're interested in. And then as Todd mentioned, on June 19th, we'll bring back the plan as is or with your modifications and updates at that time. So hopefully you had some time to look through the list of projects in the back. And I'm happy to take any questions, and Jared is here as well, should you have any.
Okay, thank you.
I do have questions. Should we take public comment first, or how do you want to organize this? I'll do whatever you like.
Well, I didn't know if you were going to take us, through sections or what you plan to do, Peter.
I planned on being as quick as possible, but I can walk you through the sections if you'd like. I will tell you this, that much of what you see, I would say at least 80 to 90% of what you see is carryover. It's an overlap from last year's capital budget. So I'm not proposing, the Public Works Department and the town staff are not proposing a great deal of new projects. There are some new projects. I think most importantly, for this program will be what happens with the decision of the taxpayers and the registered voters tomorrow with Measure F. That'll dictate a lot of our course of action. I am happy to report we're near full staff in the Public Works Department, so our project deliverability is going to increase over the next fiscal year. And so I think that a lot of the projects, again, are familiar to you. I'm happy to walk you through them by category if the council desires.
Okay, Jim?
Well, I have sort of a 1,000-foot back question. I believe this summer the county will be finalizing the plans for their Sir Francis Drake rebuild. And then next summer, if all goes well, they'll tear up the road and they'll do it again the following year. How are we going to handle that? And is the mitigations included in this budget?
Councilmember Andrews, maybe you could be more specific about
Okay,
how
you're
we
coming
are
from-
going to handle that.
Well, because folks will divert from going on to Francis Drake onto Magnolia to wherever they can to get on the freeway.
Sure.
And I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
have we thought about any sort of contingency plans for that?
Well, typically what happens in a case like that, so we'll work with Larkspur and the County of Marin on that particular project. And what'll happen on a major arterial that carries the volumes that Sir Francis Drake does, that road will be required to be open during construction. So it'll never be fully closed down, but you're right, there will be some trip choice, there will be some trip diversions. And so, typically the rest of the system can handle that excess capacity. In the peak hour, it becomes difficult. And so there could be impacts to our local streets. I haven't worked on the traffic control plan on that particular project, so I can't answer any specifics.
Okay. Please think about it.
Okay. So Peter, it's excellent work as usual. It's very, and by the way, your narrative is clearly written, which I always appreciate. My issue is with I think it's in the flood control and storm drainage. The single biggest future expense that I'm aware our town is facing is ultimately some sort of massive program. I don't know if it's levees or what. In here, it's described at one point, number 7 is a tidal barrier, 4.6 million. Another one, the Marina Village levee improvements, $1.1 million. And I'm going to be non-specific, Peter, because I don't even know how to properly describe this. But as I recall from a few years ago with Dave Bracken, he had just roughly estimated it could be $20 million, it could be more, to help protect East Corte Madera from the effects, really, of climate change. I mean, it's flood, just the bay rising. This is dramatically less than that. Is that because the number was dead wrong, or because it's going to cost us tens of millions more that go out past 2023, or because we have to spend money to find out how much it's going to cost? Or I'm sorry, there's many questions at once.
Yes, you hit it. So let me just jump in real quick. So the main difference, and what I think Jared did well, if you look at the top line of the flood control and storm drainage program on the first page,
Yep.
You're looking at $2 million that we'd like to spend in this year. We really can't spend more than $2 million in a year. That's a big chunk of dough. If you look at how much we think we need by 2023, it's closer to $11 million. So when you carry that over the next 5-year period and the next 5-year period after that, then you begin to see that the numbers that you heard about from Dave Bracken and anyone else who's going to consult with you on this issue, they're big numbers. They're 10, 20, 30, 40, $50 million.
Well, one thing I always appreciated about David, though, was that he was willing to kind of take a stab, but he would always qualify and condition and say, but, Sloan, we don't know. I mean, this is me spitballing it. Somebody's going to look. When they get through, Peter, these numbers, the 2018, 2019 numbers, or at least the 2023, will we be able to project more specific numbers, do you think? Are these still, you know what I mean? Like, how do we even know how much it's going to cost, or what? I don't even know that we have a clear plan yet.
Well, if you'll remember from our last meeting, Todd asked me to announce that we did get that climate adaptation grant.
Great.
So a big part of that grant is going to be directed towards identifying what the best solutions are, where they should occur, what their capital costs will be, and how we rank those projects. Okay. So we really are relying on the outcome of that plan to help give us more information. I think we're on a good track for that. So. I wouldn't worry too much about it. Again, we're honing in on this year. We're looking on a 5-year horizon. And again, this will come back to you, if all goes well, every 2 years, and it'll be updated. So it's not something that we just sit on until 2023. We're going to constantly be completing the projects that are in here, adding new ones, and moving forward stepwise.
So the only, I'm sorry, one more thing. The only suggestion that I would make, Peter, if you possibly can do it, is that if we know for at least that one line item, or maybe there's other things like fire protection, I don't know. If we would know that after 2023 to fix this thing or to fund it, it's some fairly significant number, we probably want to right now start to figure that thing out. Because if I could do one thing, I'd like to be thinking about not just the council right after me, but further down the line. And if we know we have an 8-figure item that we're going to need to account for in 5 years or 10 years, I'd rather start accounting for it now so that we can be, no matter how much pain, you have to tell us how painful it's going to be. I don't know if this is a giant problem or like a little bitty problem, and only you could figure it out for us. If you'd said, look, we probably need to do this because otherwise East Corte Madera is going to be underwater, then it's our job to figure out how do we get the money over the next 20 years. But 5 years, I don't know. I mean, I don't think this goes out far enough for at least flood.
Understood. Yeah, so we have a couple options. I can try to put together some longer-term vision cost estimates for the final report and have a little section on that. As you noticed, because you really like the prose and the writing and the staff report, I did mention in there that the state of the practice is like a 5 to 20-year vision.
Okay.
When I did a plan similar to this for San Francisco, we had a 20-year capital plan. It was a long-term vision.
I mean, that makes sense
It was
to me.
$50 billion in need, right? So that is helpful to some degree. On the other hand, it can be really intimidating. So in terms of what we can get done, this would be my suggestion to the council: is we stick with the 5-year vision this time, but the climate adaptation plan is what I really think is going to enable us to have that longer term vision. And as at your direction, we can put something in here for the bigger ticket items for this report when it comes back to you in 2 weeks, if you'd like.
But okay, I'm sorry, Carly, but
No, that's all right.
I don't want to limit you, Peter. Like, I don't even know what we need. You know what I mean? I'm operating off of really sketchy, long-term concepts, really from David. You might think, with like a more professional eye, there's some more clever way to manage the risk of flood in East Corte Madera. I don't even know. But I would like you to provide us with options and the caution. Not only am I not scared of it, I want you to scare the hell out of us about, look, you guys need to start planning for a $50 million problem that's going to come up. On the other hand, maybe that's fear-mongering that's not even a real issue. Maybe there are ways in which we can protect East Corte Madera that do not require the expenditure of, 8 figures plus. That's not really a true CIP budget question, but it's a bigger picture issue which worries me like nothing else in the town does.
Understood.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to add on to that just in general, Todd and I were speaking a little bit earlier, and with some of these big ticket items, that whether it be the Regional Water Quality Control Board or one of these other agencies that are requiring us to spend, I think, about $3 million a year on projects, just to be mindful that those projects get done so that they don't track us down and say that we aren't fulfilling what their requirements have been. And it just kind of brought to mind when you were saying your things, to know where the money's going to be spent and to have it as part of the plan and then make sure that we implement the plan.
Understood. And to be clear, Mayor Conan, what you're referring to with our Regional Water Quality Control Board required projects in our new permit, they are the top 5 projects in the capital list for Sanitary District 2. And so we have budget to complete what we need to this year, and we actually have budget to complete them all by 2023.
Good.
So we don't, at the staff level, we don't have any concerns that we'll deliver those projects.
Yeah,
And we have a
that's great.
full-time now staff member assigned to deliver those projects.
Good. Thank you for attending to that. Yeah, it was just to make sure that we have the money, but make sure we get the projects done. Thank you. Diane?
Thanks. This is really great. I totally agree with what Sloan said about adding things, maybe having kind of almost like footnote type items, not programmed, but identified future needs, something like that. But make it clear that it's not something that's currently programmed. The other thing is that and not necessarily for this year, but maybe for next year, it might be helpful to have kind of a status column so that we know if this is new, if this is kind of an annual maintenance item, if it's a continuation, whereas, maybe design has already been done and this is construction, or it's currently under construction, so it's the remainder of the construction or something like that. Just gives a little bit more information. I personally am really curious what the status is of our pavement rehab program for this summer. So would love to find out if you can give me like the 15-second version
Yeah.
of what we're doing there.
So our new senior engineer, RJ Suko, started today. And I met with him about this very topic. We think that, based on the schedule we have now, in order to get some paving done, we're looking at September, best case scenario. It may have to be later than that, and just in terms of getting everything lined up. We also went and field reviewed some roadways that we think may be eligible, and so we're working with PG&E and the Water District because they've done work in those roadways, and they've, I would say, not left them in the best condition. And so we're going to work with them on potentially adding new roads to this year's program to get repaved. So that's more than 15 seconds, but I also think that depending on the schedule, I've also been working with Larkspur Public Works Department. They already went out for their pavement program for this year, and we've talked about putting a bid together that puts both of our projects in the same construction phase and could conceivably save us some money. So there's a lot in the works in that. We typically do 4 to 6 streets a year. At the most, and I think that pace could accelerate. So certainly in the next year, we're going to see a lot more work done.
Okay, good. And then finally, a question about the LED streetlights that is in here somewhere. I just lost it. You had an amount in here of 100, 175, 200, 275.
What page are we?
It is not numbered.
No.
It is like the third from the last page.
Okay.
Capital Program Environmental, item number 3. And it says that there are PG&E loans available up to $250,000. Are there no grants?
There are some grants, but they're pretty competitive and hard to come by. So I don't know that we should rely a lot on a grant program for this.
Okay.
And this is a carryover project from last year.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. And I don't think I need to remind you that other towns have run into some issues when they didn't pick the right fixtures. So I appreciate you being cognizant of that. I know I've talked to Todd about that already. Make a game of it. So, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
That's it.
Jim, did you have something?
No.
Okay, I had something, and Diane, I will mention supporting your, I bet the LED grant was, I brought that up before your time
Oh,
to the
I know, yeah.
council when it was free, and Nevada was the only place that applied for it.
Got it.
And it was like, they're free, you know? So, yeah, we need to keep on top of that kind of stuff. I was just going to bring up a little bit on the Park and Rec issue and the goals and the work plan, addressed primarily at the,
Mayor, this is the next item, actually.
oh,
This will be the next item.
oh, okay, I thought we were going through the whole thing. Okay. I will hold that item. Thank you. Okay, if everybody else has, I'll open to the public. Any questions, comments, anything? Mr. Kuhnhart.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. David Kuhnhart, 141 Hill Path. I understand that in Santa Fe, where they're making a major switch to LED lights, that they are using a very low-interest loan, but the total cost of that loan and the energy that they'll be using, which is so much less, is less than what they've been paying for electricity. So the town, if we do that implementation of energy saving, won't be spending any more, and eventually will be spending significantly less after that low-interest loan gets amortized off. Is that your understanding too? Yeah, that's how it's supposed to be designed. My question is a very selfish one. Some friends on Christmas Tree Hill have asked me, well, what are we going to do about some of our streets that are falling apart? I understand that there's a very objective process of evaluating the condition of streets, and that when streets begin to show signs of actually delaminating and falling apart, and in the case of the hill,
slipping somewhat, then they are addressed and they're put on the list. I see very little of hillside streets actually called out on the list, and so I was just wondering, number one, is the general, what is it, $800,000 of street repairs, is that all streets or throughout the town? And so should I be directing neighbors to that number for potential pavement improvements on Christmas Tree Hill? That's my question number one. And question or comment number two is I completely endorse Councilmember Bailey's suggestion that we should really look at the sort of broad, big bad news about future budget requirements and bring that forward to here. I see $10 million in the category generally in the near future, and I think we can all agree that's probably going to grow for sea level rise.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Robinson?
These comments specifically on capital projects, is that correct?
Yes.
Yep.
First of all, thanks for putting together a rather daunting document. I appreciate Peter Brown's effort in putting this together. And please take this first comment in a vein that's given. For those who are seniors and have a short-term memory, I've always thought that having a budget session in a separate meeting on a separate day where the council's fresh, the staff is fresh, and the press has an opportunity to review the document before you get it. But I understand, as the town manager mentioned, this is a draft tonight that we're considering. As I mentioned, my comments are really related to the capital improvement program under the section of the budget known as the multimodal transportation project. And it mentions like $4.4 million worth of projects. And of that 4.4 million projects, $1,035,000 is dedicated to what was just discussed, the pavement rehabilitation and repairs. And it concerns me that, if I understand the document, that only 24% of the total budget is in this category. And if we're struggling to maintain our existing infrastructure, is it really wise to create new infrastructure we're going to have to maintain in the future if we can't afford to maintain what we have now? With respect to project number 2, Madera Tamil Vista Boulevard roundabout design, I remember this being discussed at the BPAC, so I was sort of prepared this was something in the works. But while I understand the intent of the project, I was wondering really what traffic analysis or engineering or geometrics been done specifically at that location. Project number 5, the ADA compliant curb ramps in front of Neil Cummings School. We've talked about that for 7 years now. I'm glad to hear that's in the budget this year, it's in the budget last year. My only request is I understand the issue of competing with all the construction going on in the north, but we ought to get that done before school starts. It's a parking lot out there when school's operation. We've been waiting for it for 7 years. I think that we should press forward and try to get that done before school starts. Project number 7, Casa Buena Avenue pathway improvements. It's $2.1 million. I heard about this at the BPAC committee as well, concerned about the cost of that and really whether this project really warrants that level of commitment. My concern initially was that there would be a taking of parking from the restaurant. They'd have to move their sign. I'm just hopeful that if we are discussing issues like that, that the individual operating at that location be aware of that. Tamalpais overchange. At one time, that was the, in terms of accidents related, both Corte Madera and Larkspur, that was the worst place that we had for accident potential. I myself had a car rear-ended and totaled at that location. Excuse me. But I wonder what our plans are for the future for that and what our commitment might be to try to get us over the hump to deal with some of the engineering issues we have related to that. Lastly, a question about, I brought up a couple weeks ago about the Ash Avenue. We were included in a project for repair this year. It hasn't been completed this year. Wondering if it's going to be in the budget for next year. I know my time's up. But there's one item that we'd discussed at the BPAC about sidewalk improvements. Santa Rafaela has a new sharing program with residents to get sidewalk projects completed. BPAC suggested we look at that, and I hope we'll continue to do that to help share some of the costs and get some of the sidewalk improvements done. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Anybody else? Jean?
Jean Greenbaum, Casa Buena Drive. I just want to remind everybody why Casa Buena Drive is on this, in this budget. We've been asking for improvements for 20 years. It is on a bike lane without any bike lanes. It has no sidewalk. It has a lot of development, and it has a lot of people walking on those streets, those windy streets. And yes, it's extremely expensive, but, and I don't even know how they're going to do it, but it is in dire need. We are a large population on that street, both commercial and especially residential, soon to be even more increased with the conclusion of the construction at 1425. So please do not consider that should be off the table in this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask you, Peter or Todd, how are we doing with Casa Buena?
Casa Buena is between 60 and 90% design. So our commitment this year was to get it 100% design, and I think we're on track for that. We're working with our consultants to finalize those plans. We've given comments to them, and so that's the commitment that we have in the budget, is to complete design. The council would have to make the decision. I mean, you're hearing the discussion now of all the projects that are important. Flood control is the most important one, and it's incredibly underfunded. And all these transportation projects are important for different reasons in different parts of town. So if the council wants to dedicate, the funding shortfall and makes Casa Buena our top priority, they're certainly welcome to do that. But other projects will come off the table if that decision is made.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Oh,
Perhaps
David?
I'm the final person, David McPherson again. First, I just want to compliment the town for having the live video stream, which allows citizens to go home and deal with their families and watch on a big screen and then be able to run back down. And maybe in the future, we can incorporate some sort of interactive feedback with citizens who cannot get here so quickly, so that they could give you, essentially a Twitter comment or Twitter question, and they can participate without actually having to show up. But thank you for instituting the live video feed. So again, I always come at these budget questions from a bicycle, pedestrian, and transit advocacy standpoint, and couldn't please us more to see as many of the multimodal projects as are listed in the budget. What I don't fully understand is whether or not the budget has any place in trying to rank projects, streets. I guess pavement eventually gets ranked in terms of which streets should be repaved, and possibly a schedule accordingly. But if there's a way that the budget can also provide citizens with a better idea of how those projects are going to be ranked, and when we can sort of anticipate pushing Public Works and the council to move certain projects ahead, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, then I'll close it to public comment and bring it back. Are there any additional?
I do have one additional, it's a comment, Peter, so I don't know, but I just would like to make it so that you have that in mind, which is that I'm concerned about the escalation in the construction costs, which I don't know how you do it and whether you look at it yourself when you redo this report periodically. Diane makes an excellent point about how it'd be good to have a column where you kind of track these things, but my observation, both at this council and other public bodies that I serve on, and in my private life where I deal with construction projects that have gone badly, I've observed that because of the North Bay fires and other things in California, the costs are like by a factor bigger, 40% more than previously anticipated. I don't know whether these current, estimated costs of these things, and I realize they're just round figures, there are a lot of zeros in here. Those numbers may be shy, and they may be heavy, depending on whether we continue to have this escalation in construction costs. I don't know what I could say other than please be mindful of that when you're putting this together.
Yeah. Just to piggyback on that, in the past, too, we've had the opportunity to prioritize some of these projects, and then like on a spreadsheet. They'll be for 2018, 2019, and then some might get deferred over to 1920. But to keep that ongoing, not to drop anything off. But I think that it really helps to see, when we're talking about what's going to come up in the future, that we see what is prioritized and how it is prioritized, and then follow through. Otherwise, sometimes some very, very important projects get lost. They fall off the radar. And so I think that that it will be helpful to get with the council's input a priority or prioritizing of the projects, but to make sure that we maintain a record year after year of these projects so that they don't go away.
So, Mayor Condon, if I may respond to your question and some of the council, and then even some of the public comments. So, I think the best way to look at this simplified version of our 5-year CIP in terms of prioritization would be, is it on the list, right? So that's number one. Are we considering it within 1 to 5 years? If you know of a project that's not on the list, let me know before we come back in a couple weeks. You can do that via email. You can think about it later. I don't have to have that comment right now. The second thing to think about from prioritization would be, is it funded in this year? Does it have a dollar amount for the current year? Right, so the purpose of the 2 columns, funds needed by 2023, is what we would need to finish it by 2023. If it doesn't have any money in the first year, then we're not planning on spending money on it, right? It's kind of that identifying as a need. And then the second way to look at it is like proportionality. How much money of the total need are we looking to spend this year? And Casa Buena came up, so if you look at, it's $250,000 of the 2.1 million that we estimate, and Sloan's right, with construction costs, it could be 2.5, it could be 3.5. The last bid we put out came in 100% over, not 40% over. So, construction costs are up, and that's real. So, but if we complete design, and we have a design that we could, if the council so directs, put out to bid for Casa Buena, then we're at least, in the conversation. But I do think we can do a more clear job of prioritizing the projects and ranking them. One thing to be aware of, though, the rankings don't carry as much meaning as you think they do. And here's why. We could rank the projects, and project number 3 could have grant-dependent funds, and project number 1 could be fully town, funded and have no grants, and it's underfunded. So in my opinion, of a town this size with this level of projects, I chose for this first crack that I took at it to leave it in this format. We can come back and rank the projects and show you, okay, this is, in order of priority, this is what we think they are. It does lead to an expectation to the community and to yourselves that they're going to be delivered in that order, and I've never seen them delivered in that order in 20 years, not even once, because things come up, emergencies come up, opportunities come up, grants come up. You look at a project like I have to consider right now the sanitary district water main work that's on Tamil Vista with the Tamil Vista Complete Streets project. So those are 2 different projects, 2 different funding sources, but I better darn well do them at the same time. If I want to, have an economy of scale. So that's just some cautionary notes on, how deep we go into ranking and prioritizing. A few of the other comments, what geometric and traffic analysis has been done for Madera Tamil Vista. The basic geometric and traffic analysis shows us that intersection works. So we don't have a funding source to build a roundabout there, but we do have some preliminary analysis that looks really good there. I agree. I've heard the pedestrian ramp improvements at Mohawk and Neil Cummins. It won't be built before school starts. We don't have a design package ready to go out to bid for that. And like I said, the stuff that's been coming back in has been coming in at 2x our cost estimates. In terms of the question about the pavement rehab program, yes, this is the dollar amount that we're looking, and council could say, you know what, we're not spending enough money in pavement rehab. Let's put 1.5, not $850,000 into the next year, and we can attempt to do that. I'll work with Daria to try to find, if we have money sources to do that. But the main, everybody wants their street in perfect condition, right? But we're not going to pave every street. We're going to pave a small number of streets in town, and we're going to do it based on the industry standard, which is pavement condition, volume, safety, and need. So a lot of times residential streets that are narrow and don't have a lot of volume, even if their condition is low, they're not going to rise to the ranking. And if council directs and says, you know what, we want to start prioritizing residential streets regardless of volume, then, again, there's a trade-off, right? San Clemente is going to suffer. Paradise Drive is going to suffer. Tamil Vista is going to suffer. So we have to think about the trade-offs and where our roads are really traveled versus where we may have requests for pavement improvements. I think I mentioned the Casa Buena. And then another question on the Tamalpais Pet Access over 101. That's a Caltrans project. We have no funds. I'm not recommending any funds be budgeted for that project. We certainly can. But Vice Mayor First and I have been working with Caltrans. We have a great working relationship. We're going to continue to work with them. And I think in the future, when it comes time, the town will probably be asked to contribute some funds on that. So those are some of the comments I took note of. Ash Avenue is on the list of a residential street that will be paved in the near future. But again, we still have to put that package together and get it out. So for the repavement program. That's all I have.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Peter. Okay, so now we're going to move on.
I feel like you've got comments and
I
direction.
do. We do have comments and direction. We will bring you back an updated version at your next meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Do we need public comment?
Well, I asked already, and we had two speakers. We already did. Okey doke. Now, our next topic. Daria, welcome.
Thank you. Okay. Good evening. I'm going to be presenting the operating budget, which, as the town manager said, will also be on the June 19th agenda for final approval. The operating budget consists mainly of the general fund, which is where the revenues and expenditures for the day-to-day running of the town are recorded. These revenues and expenditures are mainly recurring, although there are some one-time items recorded here as well. And there are also some other funds which have been established to segregate certain types of revenues and expenses, which I'll also mention briefly. There's an overview of all the funds, including the capital funds that the Public Works Director just went over, on page 10, and then there's an explanation of all of the various funds beginning on page 11. But the general fund, the main page is page 14. That's where there's a summary of the current year and next year's proposed budget. There's only 1 year for comparison right now because we're in the process of implementing the new software, but we intend to bring some historical information for comparison to the next meeting. And as requested, I changed the column to show the change from the prior year's estimated actuals. In both years, the current year and the next year, the proposed budget and this year's estimated actuals, there's an operating surplus of $400,000 to $500,000 projected. Not including the one-time revenues from the state that were received in the current year, revenues are expected to increase by 5.1% next year. This increase includes an overall increase to property tax of 4%, including a 4.7% increase to secured property tax. And those estimates are based on information received from the county. You'll notice that the state revenue is showing a decrease of more than $600,000, and that's due to one-time reimbursements from the state in the current year for disaster-related expenditures. You'll notice that use of money and property is increasing, and the major increase there is the $320,000 gravel lot development fee. overall revenues expected to increase by nearly $353,000. And there's a detailed list of all of the individual revenue types beginning on page 15 for the next several pages. So expenditures are in two places. One place is here on this page, on page 14, and that's by category. And then they're also on page 17 by department. So I'll go over these on page 14 first, and then the changes affecting the individual departments. So salaries have been increased by 3% as noted in the letter in the beginning of the budget. And this is a placeholder only. No salary schedules have actually been revised at this time. Negotiations are ongoing. The 3% is an estimated maximum adjustment to the salary schedule. And when negotiations are completed, any proposed increases will be presented to the town council as part of a two-meeting approval process. But we included that increase as a placeholder. As mentioned at the May 1st meeting when a summary of this budget was presented, PERS unfunded liability payments are increasing by approximately $250,000, mainly as a result of CalPERS lowering its discount rate to 7.25% next year. And there'll be a similar increase in the subsequent year when the discount rate is again lowered, this time to 7%. And then in following years, PERS is going to begin changing its amortization schedule from 30 to 20 years, resulting in additional increases. So in order to address its increasing retirement obligation, the town is taking the step of having all employees pay at least half of the normal cost of the PERS pension cost, and that was achieved through a combination of pension reform, which applies to employees hired after January 2013 who were not a member of PERS at that time or a member of a reciprocal system, and also through negotiations where what they call classic PERS employees pay an additional either 4.5%, 5.5%, or 9% of their salary toward the employer PERS contribution, in addition to the 8 or 9% of salary that they pay toward the employee contribution. And it differs according to bargaining unit. Additionally, the town contracted with an actuarial firm called Bartel Associates to complete a pension analysis. And the results of that show that the CalPERS discount rate will trend closer to 6% in the coming years. And so as a means of trying to mitigate the volatility with respect to the pension rates, the town established a pension stabilization trust with the goal of stabilizing pension costs. And in this current year, the initial town contribution of $366,000 was made with savings from a side fund, which was paid off in 2016-17. And a side fund is what PERS was calling the unfunded liability that was calculated years ago in the early 2000s when small employers were required to pool their plans at PERS. So that was paid off, and that $366,000 was deposited into the pension stabilization trust. For the coming fiscal year, staff's recommending increasing that payment to $936,000. And the additional $570,000 would be from the $320,000 in the gravel lot development money that is expected to be received, and the other $250,000 would come from payments that are currently being paid into the OPEB trust. And that also was previously discussed, the possibility of doing that, because even though the town has been depositing $500,000 annually into the OPEB trust, which OPEB is other post-employment benefits. It's for retiree medical costs, and the town's been depositing $500,000 in there since 2014-15, with the goal of reaching full funding status by 2023. And there's nearly $2.3 million in the trust currently. The pay-as-you-go payment is expected to be $514,000 or so in the next fiscal year. And the pay-as-you-go amount's expected to be manageable with the general fund for several years. And because the PERS unfunded liability rate is increasing much more drastically each year, and because the town doesn't have much flexibility with regard to paying the unfunded liability, it's legally required to do so. The staff's recommending that $250,000 of the $500,000 be paid into the Pension Stabilization Trust, and then lower the OPEB payment to $250,000. Also included is a 6% increase to medical premiums effective January 2019. This was an estimate, and now appears that there actually won't be an increase to the Kaiser rate, which is what the town's cap is linked to. So that won't occur. Regarding the individual departments, which are on page 17, some of the major changes regarding the departments are that you'll see administration and finance has decreased due to the retirement of the former finance director. Disaster preparedness is showing 0 because it's now, those costs are now reflected in the sales tax fund. The Public Works Department, maintenance and operation, you'll see that that budget has decreased by nearly $257,000 for several reasons, including reducing contract personnel by about $115,000 due to staff taking on work previously performed by outside contractors. Also, overtime has been decreased, and $90,000 in weed abatement has been moved to the sales tax fund, as it has to do with fire prevention. Non-departmental, of course, has increased for the reasons that I just stated about the pensions. That's where that is reflected. The fire department is now shown in contract services rather than individual line items, which distorts the comparisons from one year to the next. And just a little note about the fire department. The salaries look like they increased this year, but that has to do with the fact that there was about $437,000 in overtime related to the state fire disaster, and that has been reimbursed by the state. Police services have increased by about 5.7%, or $195,000 due to a 3% cost of living increase, pension increases, and also a payment into the reserve fund for the police authority. The recreation fund expenditures in the general fund include the department head salary and 2 part-time customer service employees. The recreation supervisor salary has been moved back to the recreation fund itself. The general fund also includes janitorial services and other building-related services, as well as utilities, a recreation consultant, and maintenance for the recreation software. The recreation fund itself is estimated to produce a slight surplus, eliminating the need for a transfer from the general fund. Overall, expenditures and transfers out have increased by nearly $280,000, or 1.6%. The operating surplus is expected to be $492,000, which will bring the general fund ending balance to nearly $3.4 million, or 18% of expenditures and transfers out. That's the general fund. Do you want me to go on to the other funds, or do you want me to stop for questions? Or
Okay, any questions, comments, anything for the general fund expenditure?
I do have a couple questions, but they're more overarching. I wonder if it would make more sense to have her finish whatever her
Okay.
presentation is and then launch in, but it's up to you, Carla, whatever you like. I do have a couple questions for her, but to my mind, it might be better till after she says whatever she's prepared to say, and then we can fire away at her.
Jim, do you have anything?
No, I'd like to hear her out. And
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I just had questions about the Recreation Department, but we'll come back to that.
Okay, that's one of the other funds that
Yeah.
begins on page 88. And these are other funds that are not part of the capital fund, but they've just been segregated out for, so to keep track of the revenues and expenditures. And the main funds there that I'd like to discuss are on page 92, the Equipment and Technology Fund, which that includes the $115,000 for the building and planning permit tracking software that that department gave a presentation on, as well as some technology equipment replacement. And that fund is basically funded from the general fund. It doesn't require a transfer this year because there's a sufficient balance in there to pay for those items. The insurance fund also, which is on the next page, on page 95, is also funded by the general fund. This year, it will require a transfer of about $669,000. Expenditures have increased by $47,000 due to increases in insurance premiums, and then this transfer will ensure that there's enough of a reserve for claims as stated in the latest actuarial report for both liability and for workers' comp. So that transfer will make that fund whole. Then Park Madera Center is still showing a negative, but the negative is no longer increasing, it's slightly decreasing due to refinancing of debt and to rental income. And then the Recreation Fund on page 100 is showing actually a little bit of a surplus, $20,000, due to recreation staff and the Recreation Commission working to reorganize some of the programs, resulting in savings of about $350,000.
I just wanted to add a couple quick points and thank Daria for her work. It's difficult. We like to go back and look at trends. We've talked about this for the last 5 and 10 years. It gives us a good idea how we're doing, and it's not apples to apples. It's a very complicated. I can tell you the last 12 months of Daria's life has been spent on trying to make it apples to apples, and it's just really difficult. So we had to start somewhere and move forward. That's what we're doing. Councilmember Bailey and Councilmember Andrews specifically asked for some 10-year trends moving forward in both revolving revenues and expenditures, our debt, looking at our pension and retiree health liabilities, so we can really, a visual is worth 1,000 words. So we will have that ready at the next meeting. We're working on that now. We know that's very important for you, and that's why we're not asking you to take action today. So I wanted to point that out. I also wanted to point out to the council and the community that really, we just didn't start working on this a couple months ago. We have a finance subcommittee of the council. It's Vice Mayor first and Councilmember Andrews, who we work with closely as we start to really plan, and that's really the conversation of the sales tax measure even. Let's plan out for future generations of council, staff, and our community to give them options 20, 30 years out. And so that's the work that we've been doing. We had a meeting for the council business item on May 1st to talk about really your 15 to 17 business kind of items to think about for this budget. Again, this is the second meeting to look at the draft budget, and then June 19th we'll actually ask you to take action. I wanted to just bring you back to page 14 for a second, because since we don't have any charts for you yet, and I have a simple mind, I really want to just talk about our operating budget.
What page are you on, Todd?
Page 14. And so the message here is our revenues continue to be strong. Property taxes are continuing to go at a rate. Most jurisdictions are higher. I think they're like 6 to 7%, 8%. They're really trending high. In Corte Madera, we're a little bit lower. It's a conservative number. It's about 4%. It's been kind of the average the last few years. Our sales tax revenue, again, it fluctuates, right? And so we had a spike. It was averaging about 6.2 to 6.4 million. That's the second revenue line item. The county and we estimated in 17-18 that it would be about 6.7 million. You can see where we're trending a little lower. It's probably going to come in closer to 6.3. Really, if you look at our town in a real simplistic way, about $200,000 of that was the dealership that has been vacant. Good news, Volvo's coming back, so this fiscal year, and so we're looking at closing that $200,000 gap there. And the construction we had at the town center for 18 to 24 months, really that is why you see that difference between 6.7 and 6.3. As you know, town center is coming to a completion. We're looking at filling those vacancies, and Volvo is coming back to Corte Madera in the empty lot. So we're expecting, we're still taking a conservative approach, and we're showing 6.5 million, but I just wanted to point that out. We're taking a conservative number on the transient occupancy taxes. You can see we came in at about 908,000 this last year, so we're going to keep that number. But overall, revenues are strong and they continue to go up. Something to keep in mind with this, when you compare the estimated actual for 17-18 to 18-19, you can see we went up 1.9%, about $400,000. That doesn't include the state reimbursements for fire that we average $400,000 to $500,000 annually. So our revenues will probably be $500,000 higher this coming fiscal year above what you see here. So the story is revenues are high, but we're taking a conservative approach. We show a surplus of approximately $500,000. We're going to be conservative. When you look at expenditures, and if you look at the bottom line expenditures, it looks like we went up about $300,000. We went up $279,000. But I really want to point out to the council and the community, a big part of that is us being proactive as the work that we've been doing with the vice mayor and Councilmember Andrews of attacking our unfunded liabilities. And so when you look at this, as Daria mentioned, it's really, if you look at $936,000 of that is going to our pension stabilization trust. $250,000 of that is going to the pre-funding of our OPEB, our retiree health obligations. And so that's a big number, and that's a big difference of why you see the expenditures going up. But when you look at the operation, what we're doing is we're evaluating from department to department of how we can be more efficient. We're not adding personnel, we're moving personnel around. You know, for instance, you'll hear something in the coming months, we have 3 customer service reps. Well, 1 to 2 of them are doing more than customer service rep. And so we're not looking at a big pay increase, but we're looking at giving them the title and position and job description that they should be doing. And so for them, we're looking at an administrative an analyst. And so it's give them the position that they're doing, the work that they're doing. And so I point that out for a couple key items. When you roll down and you see, we talked a lot about Central Marin Fire. And so it's hard. You can't do apples to apples comparisons of previous years, but I'm going to give you one. Currently, this fiscal year and moving into next fiscal year, we're sharing operations with Larkspur. And so we came up with a formula of sharing costs 50-50, revenue staying with the city and town. So we're not sharing revenue, but we're sharing our operational cost, our line items and personnel. And so you can see that budget item of $4.2 million. If you compare it to where we'd be today if we didn't share services and if we didn't look at consolidation, we would be paying today $4,842,000. We would be paying $622,000 more annually just to have the same fire department we have now. Arguably, we have more resources now sharing with Larkspur. That $622,000 really allows us to do what we talked about with the pre-funding of our unfunded liabilities. We made our own opportunity, and now we're able to pre-fund and plan for the next decades to come. So overall, our budget is healthy. But we have a lot of things headed our way. The last point that I really want to emphasize to the council and the community is the sales tax. The sales tax measure on page, help me here, Daria, doing that. On page 66 and 67. So again, we added an extra step this year, and we'll continue to do that in years moving forward. We met with the Sales Tax Oversight Committee. And there has been a couple changes to this since then, because again, it's a working draft. but we met with them and went over this budget and also received their feedback. Generally speaking, they support the concept and what you see in front of you, but I wanted to point out some items that this sales tax measure, especially of sales, if our sales tax measure passes tomorrow night, it allows us to be really proactive in a few key areas for us. Right now, 2,500 homes in the town of Corte Madera are in a fire zone. So the state in a fire zone, 2,500 of our 4,800 households. And so there's been a lot mentioned of flood, but fire is also a huge issue for us. And so what you see here on the top, on page 67, it's in yellow. There's two items that we're adding. Fire prevention, weed abatement. So that's education, but it's also contracting work to help our fire marshal and our maintenance crew do weed abatement. So not only in the town-owned properties for fire prevention, but also to enforce, to educate, and ultimately, if necessary, enforce our local ordinances to make sure people provide defensible space in their neighborhoods. We're not asking, it's an expectation. And so with that, we have funding to do that work up front if necessary, and to get reimbursed for the work after. The other thing is the fire prevention, the code enforcement. Code enforcement's been very helpful for us for quality of life issues for building and planning. This is not that. This is specifically a standalone code enforcement to work under the fire marshal for education and code enforcement for enforcement issues as it relates to fire prevention, and that's a $100,000 budget item. So this is new to the budget. It's been reviewed by the Sales Tax Oversight Committee, and concept they support that, and I wanted to point that out to you. Also at the bottom of page 67, you'll see a couple other items. Senior youth programs, $50,000. That is for our intergenerational center for senior and youth programs, and I'm going to talk about that last in a second. So I'll circle back to that. And also disaster preparedness. We've moved our disaster preparedness line item from the operating budget, and we put it into the sales tax measure. It's $75,000. That supports the neighborhood response group coordinator. It supports our CERT teams, education, funding for projects for matching funds with the Corte Madera Community Foundation or other groups.
Excuse me, Todd. I'd like to make a motion that we continue the meeting for 1.5 hours.
Jim.
Councilmember Andrews?
Yes.
Councilmember Bailey?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio? Vice Mayor First?
Yes.
Mayor Condon?
Yes.
And just lastly, just as a point, this sales tax override fund, this is really the impetus for the future of, we have the $350,000 grant that Peter talked about earlier. That is really going to identify and give us multiple options for both flood and fire prevention, but this is going to be the engine that makes it happen, the sales tax monies. And if you may recall, when we started educating the community on our issues, we're looking at $50 million between now and 2030. So if you want to look at a number for fire and flood prevention, that's the number. And then now Peter and his team have to execute it and really paint that picture for us as a community. And then lastly, I want to point out to the council, this budget isn't, in past years, I think we have to be careful, and we would estimate revenues or expenditures, specifically in Park and Rec. We did it in maintenance. We've done it in other departments. If we didn't have a good idea of what we were thinking this fiscal year, we either eliminated a program or we took it out of the budget. So right now in Park and Rec, we eliminated a $350,000 deficit. And so we are rebuilding the programs now. So when you go to page, and I think the mayor may have been referencing it, but if you go to the Park and Rec budget, on page 51, you'll see right for every department, you'll see the general fund and then a work plan. So the work plan's on page 51 of Park and Rec. So what we did in Park and Rec, as you may recall, we brought in Dave Wilkinson. He's a retired Park and Rec director for Larkspur, and he also worked for Corte Madera. So he has a 6-month plan to really evaluate all programs, personnel, everything we do, and help Mario and our team rebuild our programs. So right now, you see the 18-19 goals and accomplishment, or the goals and work plan. I want to tell you that in October, the team is going to come back to this council and give you an overview of what we found and what we recommend. This page will entirely change. You'll have recommendations with personnel, with programs, with budget. And really, we're going to break up Park and Rec into 3 categories. And I'm really simplifying this, but one is outdoor activities. Think about all of our sports programs, right? All of our activities in the parks. That'll be supported with our capital improvements projects with our parks master plan. You'll have, I'll just call it the community center, the hall. So, just like the vice mayor and the mayor and the many members of the council mentioned multiple times, let's advertise. It's a great hall. Let's have weddings. Let's bring people in. So you'll have a component, I'll just call it the community center hall. And then you'll also have the intergenerational center. And the intergenerational center is a component of one of 3. And so it's important because we're going to rebuild all of our youth and senior programs from the intergenerational center. We now have facilities to do that. So in October, you'll see this page on page 51 will completely change, and it'll talk about 3 components. It'll tell you what we're trying to accomplish, how we're going to accomplish it, and what it's going to cost. What you won't see is a $300,000 deficit. What you'll see is amazing programs that we've never provided before, and we're really excited about it. We didn't have enough time when this was written to tell the great stories of the Intergenerational Center, the senior and youth programs we're doing now. Again, it opened in April. We started writing this in May, June. So we look at really having a nice, healthy conversation and story and some statistics to provide council for consideration again in October. And with that, I will stop talking and open it up to you.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Really well done. Thank you. My 3 questions are really super tiny, which is evidence that I thought this was really great and easy to read. So thank you. First question is for you, Todd. When you said so many homes are in a fire zone, what's the definition you're using for fire zone? Is that within the wildland urban interface?
Right. So the state of California asked the utilities, so I'm going off PG&E right now when I talk about this, because PG&E is going to be coming to us when we talk about undergrounding and hardening our infrastructure. So they did an assessment and they broke it into 3 tiers. There's this tier 3 is severe, tier 2 is moderate to serious, and then tier 1 is everybody else. And so when you think about Summit, Christmas Tree Hill, and you work your way down to the north on the ridge, that's tier 3. And when you think about Chapman Park all the way down to Meadowsweet as it wraps around, that's tier 2. It's a total of 2,500 homes. I'm about to post it on the website and send it to the council for you to review it. But when you think about our community, here's the thing. 4,800 households, 2,500 are in the fire zone, and the other 33% of our community is in the flood zone. I think it's 3 streets in our community that are okay. It's a big deal. We're unique, and so.
Okay, but I still want to get to whose definition of fire zone? Is it strictly PG&E?
No, it's through the state. The state of California and the fire side. So they did an analysis. I'll get some more information. I don't have the exact.
Okay.
But that is what we go off of.
And our insurance company is using this?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I think it would be good at some point to, if there's anything the town can do to, like we do with our flood insurance program, through actions taken by the town to reduce risks to benefit homeowners when it comes to their insurance bills.
Absolutely.
I think that would be really good to know about. Next question. Do we have a plan to implement OpenGov this year?
Yes, we are in the process of doing so. They have our chart of accounts. They were able to put it in and get reports in only 3 days after I sent it to them, so that was good. I'm supposed to talk to them, I have an appointment to talk to them tomorrow on the training to get, the reports that are needed. One of the things that held us up a little bit was the conversion from the old system to the new system. There were major changes. And when the software company Tyler Technologies came out here, they hadn't told me in advance that moving things from fund to fund was a problem. So we had to create some temporary accounts to put things in, regarding the moving of the funds. And so it wouldn't have made any sense to anybody to have reports saying, temporary account or something. So that's what we're dealing with, but we're hoping to go live with that very soon.
Well, congratulations, thank you. And the cost for that is in the budget?
Yes.
Okay, great. And there is someone in town who's kind of been holding on to a lot of the town's historic archives. And I know she is ready to give that up. It's been cluttering her home for a long time. And these are things that I know the town wants to keep. Is there any place in town that we can store them? If not, is there any money in the budget for storage?
Yes, I've been talking to her as well, and we can take care of that. And we have some ideas as well.
And there's something in the budget for it?
Yeah, we could take care
Great.
of it.
Thank you. That's it.
Okay. Jim,
One question I have is, I remember seeing some software for projecting pension expenses and so on. Is that appearing in the budget anywhere?
It's a big one, and for those that don't know what Councilmember Andrews is talking about, and I think it's a lot of the community is asked about that. They're like, well, if you have a huge unfunded liability, how can you give raises? And if you do get a raise, how does that impact the town in future unfunded liabilities? And so it's called GovInvest. Daria is working closely with them now, and we have it in this budget. We plan on having that available, hopefully.
I think the contract's on the next agenda, and then I think they said they could start implementing, I think they said the first week in July, the first or second week of July. They said it did not take a long time.
Good.
So it is in the budget.
Okay.
Yeah, just a couple things. Todd, you kind of anticipated I was going to go here, but it's super important from my own perspective to have, if not a trend line, some context. So some of these items go back 2 years, and some of them is a single year. I trust and respect the work you guys are doing, but I can't place it if I don't see a bigger sense of where we fall within that. I recognize that you've got to start somewhere, and you've only had a year or so of like trying to figure this thing out. But taken in isolation, it's virtually impossible to exercise any meaningful oversight. I can't do I don't think we can do our job if you don't kind of place it somehow. And I don't know how you can get that done. I recognize it may not be realistic to go back years and years, but a single year, it's just, it's hard.
I'll share with you a problem that we've had, and it'll go back to auditors, and it goes back to people in the business of finance. George is one of a kind.
Yep,
Call him
I know.
Rain. He's Rain Man, and he's amazing. But there's only one George. Here's the problem, Councilmember Bailey, with it, is, for instance, you would have public works maintenance. And so for here, it's one-stop shopping, right? Public works maintenance is on one page. How many people you have? What's the budget? What it is? What we had before historically would be you would have 32% of employee A would go over here, and then we'd push them to parks, to sanitary, and you go back historically, and it's almost impossible with the ins and outs that happen at the start of the year, the middle of the year, and at the end of the year. You can't follow it. It is almost, and I'm really simplifying this, but it's just one example. It is impossible, but I think we understand. I think it's the bottom line too. When you look at some of the departments, I think we're going to try our best, and we're trying to use OpenGov to paint that picture. Because you're right. Like, give me some historical context. So we're going to do our best to try to do that for you. But it's not going to be completely apples to apples. But we can do our best, and that's all we can do.
No,
And
I accept that,
we
Todd. I accepted it
recognize
when you said it last time. I accept it now. But even if you're grouping things, there has to be some kind of way so that we can see it'll jump out if there's something weird happening, which you'll then be able to immediately explain why there's this delta because of an accounting thing or whatever. But in isolation, it's just, I don't know, $204,000 for outside services. Okay, I don't know. I mean, maybe if it's been $200,000 for the last 5 or 10 years, then I don't get drawn to ask you questions about it, or whoever should be questioning, and you don't even see it either. Right. So anyway, that's why I do have that. It is an important thing. Secondly, this is maybe an accounting question, so if I reveal my ignorance, it's just the course of life with me, but I don't understand why our budget would ever be different from the actual. Don't we have to balance it, right? So if you have a revised budget, shouldn't that always equal whatever the actuals are, or the estimated actuals, or no?
The budget is basically sort of the numerical plan of what the town thinks is going to happen. And I think it's pretty rare that it would be exactly, that the actuals would be, when they came in, would be exactly what the budget
Okay.
was. I personally haven't seen it, but, I mean, there's always a little bit of a difference.
Okay, let me come after it this way then. I understood a budget to be something that we have authorized the payment of monies for, or the receipt of money we've done, whatever, and that's then a cap without some further authorization from the council. Is that right, or am I misunderstanding that?
Yes, my understanding, what I've always been told, is within what they call major object
Yes,
code.
right.
So it's, if salaries in public works go over a little bit, but
Yes.
salaries in, planning or something are under a little bit, that's not necessarily something that would have to, go before the council, as long as you're within the budget itself. But
I've always understood at some point you've got to come back to the town council and say, and maybe that's this, and say, the actual amount was X. So
Oh, yes.
our budget really needs to be X.
Yeah, yes, the actuals are presented.
Okay.
At some point, I'll give you the unaudited actuals, in a couple months, and then the
Right.
auditor will come and there'll be a report for, the audited actuals.
So having those revised budgeted numbers are not particularly meaningful to me. The way to do it would be to have, for example, what the original estimate was, and then what the actual amount is. I don't mind reconciling, as you probably need to on a periodic basis, revisions to that original estimate, giving you the necessary, or the town, the necessary authority to pay whatever you have to pay. But it's not real meaningful to see that the revised budget is, since that, I mean, I don't know what it originally was, you know what I mean?
Right, okay.
It's just not.
Yeah, typically, there's the adopted budget.
Yep.
And then there's usually a mid-year revision, and maybe, another revision. This year, there were two finance directors, and I don't know if you recall, periodically you would see things that were being revised, put in there. I didn't do any, the previous director did, so I included, they were approved, so I included them in that revised budget, for the.
I just think it would
yeah.
be, in terms of a forecasting exercise, to know what was the original estimate, not what the revisions are. But
Yeah,
that may not be a general accounting principle.
No,
or
it
whatever.
is, and normally
Okay.
it would be done that way, but again, the changing of the account numbers just caused all kinds of havoc, and
Right.
normally I would never really recommend to do that mid-year, but just because of the situation where it was such an extreme situation, we had to do it in the middle.
Okay. And then just two other quick things. One of them is, and I don't know if this is for you, Todd, or you, Daria, but I wouldn't mind having a sense how we compare in terms of best practices. So, for example, maybe you don't need to put this in the report, but I wouldn't mind at least a verbal report, a percentage of our town that we spend on whatever. Is this like, are we doing great? Are we terrible? My suspicion is you guys are kind of awesome at this, but I would like you to confirm that for me rather than just because I like you both personally, I'm getting persuaded by it. How do we compare in a big picture way with other towns in the state, in our county, whatever, conceptually? And then the last thing is, I think, Todd, you have really woken me up to this idea that I'm probably not as sensitive to the dangers that we face from a serious fire threat here in town. I'm intellectually aware of it, but I think on a regular basis when I look at budgets about flood problems, and we probably need to have an equal sense of urgency about fire problems, given what happened to our brothers and sisters up in North Bay. I wouldn't mind at some point a threat assessment from, Scott or somebody about, are we okay? I'm aware that our flood problems in the foreseeable future, maybe 10 years out, maybe 20 years out, is potentially catastrophic, right? I mean, we have some long-term problem. Maybe it's longer term than that, and maybe not, but it's coming, and I think about it a lot. I wonder if there is some bigger picture fire prevention or some threat of fire that we ought to be in a more urgent way thinking about in terms of budgeting money or town services or something. Or maybe if we cut back the weeds, we're okay. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Or I wouldn't mind having somebody who's got some real knowledge educating, frankly, us. Maybe this is my own bad. Maybe I need to reach out and ask more questions. Like, how are we as a town? Have we protected our town from this foreseeable problem? Okay, sorry, that's it. And I know we're getting close, Carla.
Okay, thanks, Sloan. Yeah, the whole plan that you submit is really very readable and understandable, and I thank you for that. The only thing that, and I really don't even need to key in on it because Todd already did, and that was my concern that there wasn't today anything as far as appropriations for the intergenerational center. We've been operating at, well, the town did the repurposing of the area. To date, we haven't asked the town for anything. All of the salaries have been paid on either from grants or donations. And so we are very pleased with that, particularly with our growing plans that we have that we're hoping to implement in the summer when kids are out of school. But so I guess I need to be patient to wait until I see something new in October. Is that correct?
That's correct, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you. I will, as hard as that is for me.
We'll talk before.
Yeah, just send them over. But anyway, I look forward to that and to the continued support, not only of the council, but of staff and the public for the successes that we've been experiencing over there. It's really been very gratifying. So I hope that we can see some changes there, particularly with the opportunity to do a little tiny bit more expansion because we're already running out of room. So anyway, I thank you for that. Now, is there anybody from the public? Okay. And Jim, you'll follow David, please?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I have a clever question.
Uh-oh.
When Measure F is successful and the terminus of the override of the sales tax goes away, doesn't it make sense to bring the sales tax override budget of the whole thing into the operating budget and not have two separate funds? And the only reason why I could think that is not appropriate is because there is variability in our sales tax revenue over time, and we're carrying a surplus. There's the revenues are way below the proposed expenditures on this, so we're carrying forward a surplus. In other words, it's a way to fund some of the capital improvement program. It would just make so much more sense to me if after Measure F passes and the override doesn't have a sunset, the two get wrapped in together.
Well, I'll just comment and then I'll turn it over, but it's always been my understanding that that those funds aren't commingled, just so that we can keep better track of where the money is being appropriated. And it also enables the Oversight Committee, which is part of that legislation, to be able to have a handle on the amounts that, not just the general fund, but as a separate entity from the tax override. So that's always been my understanding, that those funds aren't commingled.
Okay. Measure F, the operating budget, the Measure F funds, they are all part of the general fund. But we have, in effect, two, I won't say sub-accounts, but sub-budgets under the general fund. One is primarily capital, that's going to be Measure F, okay? And then the other is all of our other activity. And we're, just trying to make certain that the, sort of, as someone who's pushed for Measure F, my nightmare is in 5 years, we have commingled the money and we're suddenly using all the Measure F money to pay salaries for, whoever's around, okay? And then suddenly we don't have any capital budgeting funds. And so, that's why sort of mentally, we're trying to maintain separate buckets.
Yes,
Yes.
the funds are segregated on the town's books, but when the financial statements are prepared, when the auditors do that, then they roll up the sales tax funds into the general fund and some other funds too.
Mm-hmm.
So it is all presented as the general fund at that point.
Okay, Jim?
Jim Robinson, Ash Avenue, Corte Madera. Just a question and a comment. The town manager mentioned the issue of TOT taxes, and I know that we have not yet developed any resolution ordinance required to collect taxes from short-term rentals from Airbnbs. I've mentioned this before, and my concern is not necessarily the revenue that we're losing, but my concern, as I've mentioned before, is our quality of life issues by waking up some morning and finding out you're living next door to a bed and breakfast place. And there's some issues related to that. So my question is, and I know the planning director will appreciate this, but when will we be bringing this back to discuss the Airbnb issue? And I know everything I've read, everybody's kind of thrown their hands up or said, hell no, we're not going to allow them in our community. I know that even the states struggled with this issue. So question is, will we be looking at that this year as part of the operating budget? The second one, I bought a home 21 years ago, and I did some research before I came, and there wasn't many options, but I purposely bought my home where I did because I was concerned about high fire hazard, and I'm concerned that it's still the number one concern I have, not concerned about the safety of my family or the home. I have full faith and confidence in Central Maryland Police and also in our fire, but I am concerned that not about necessarily the cost and how much we save, but are we providing the level of service that we've had in the past and will continue to have in the future that will help reassure us as citizens that we're going to have adequate response times. And while we talk about cost savings, it's like when you talk to a accounting professor, they'll tell you, when you're talking about efficiency and effectiveness, efficiency has to do with, how much money you spend to do the job. Effectiveness is whether you get the job done. And I'm not telling you something you don't already know, but that's just a concern for me as a resident. And I know that when I had the fire department look at my house, one of the things they first told me to do is clean off the shrubbery on the hillsides, get rid of my shake roofs. There are lots of things we can do as residents, but I do concur with what the town manager said. We really need to have an aggressive, even if Jim Robinson has something on his hillside that needs to be cleared, I need to be told about that. We need to be followed up on that. We need to make sure that if it isn't done, that there's some mechanism or methodology to make sure that it gets done, and that the work is paid for by whatever the residents required to do that. So those are my question about Airbnb and my comment about, the high fires hazard area. You can find that on the IJ. They printed it up a couple of months ago. I looked at it. Ash Avenue, my half is outside of the fire hazard area, but sort of like the deer signs, I don't know if those are for the car or the deer, but I don't know that that's fire when it comes, it's going to stop in the middle of Ash Avenue, but it's kind of daunting to look at that, and I'm glad that town manager brought that up because you want to see where you are in the community. But I think it's more important how we're all going to be served wherever we live and whatever it's flood or fire. And the last thing I wanted off topic to Diane and Carl, really thank you for the work that you've done on the town council and the tireless, I know what you have done in terms of time and commitment, and really appreciate that. I know you probably don't get a lot of credit for what you do, but appreciate that and wish you well in whatever you do after you leave the council.
Oh, thanks, Jim. Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I'm happy to answer.
Would you
take those
please?
really quickly. So the fire service, great question. I focus on, since it's budget, I focused on money, but let's talk about service real quick because it's a good point that Mr. Robinson brings up. Our paramedic service is the same as it was 3 years ago. It's not changing. It's the same service. What's exciting about what we're doing is we're eliminating redundancy, so the high price jobs. So now we have a standalone fire marshal. We haven't had a standalone fire marshal since I've been here in 22 years. A standalone. And that fire marshal now has support underneath him or her of $100,000 in sales tax support. The other exciting thing is, and the firefighters are really excited about this, a lot of our engine companies, again, we have 4 fire stations between Corte Madera and Larkspur. Those fire stations are staying in place. The fire engines are staying where they are. But the nice thing is we're actually adding firefighters. We're adding 3 firefighters to the Central Marin Fire Authority model that we didn't have before. So we're adding firefighters. So the overall service isn't staying the same, it's actually improving. It's really exciting. And so to the point of Mr. Robinson and the question from Councilmember Bailey of threat assessments, I think it's time that we probably schedule a couple meetings with the fire chief to tell that story and to educate us. Secondly, Airbnb, Councilmember Bailey at the last meeting asked me specifically to get that going and get an update to council. We came to you, God, I think it was 6 to 8 months ago. It's time to come back. Honestly, right now, we have a full plate between now and when this current council is seated. So we're gonna try to get the budget approved. And when the new council is seated, there is a number of things to come before council, a lot of ordinance. We're talking about view ordinances, Airbnb. We're going to be talking about the noise ordinance. So there's a bunch of ordinances you'll see over the next 6 months with the new council. So.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Todd. Oh, it is, okay. Do we have a motion
Continue?
now?
Wait, can I ask a question before we make the motion, though? Can we discuss it for 1 second? Can we just continue the other items, or do we have to pass like the sanitary and the other stuff?
Well, this is coming back to us.
I would just say the sanitary district budget item is straightforward. We've already covered it in the CIP. The only remaining item for tonight that would be helpful, because Peter is going on vacation at the next meeting, so I owe him one, is the second reading of the lateral ordinance. And there's some specific feedback the council gave us, and if you extend it, that would be the only item. I think Peter could cover that.
I would also have to renotice it in the IJ.
Peter could cover it in 5 minutes or less, because you gave us specific feedback, but it's up to you.
All right, I'll go along with it.
Move to extend the meeting for 30 minutes.
Second.
Yes.
Councilmember Andrews?
Yes.
Councilmember Bailey?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio? Vice Mayor First?
Yes.
Mayor Condon?
Yes.
So, I mean, should we try to do both items then, or what?
Yeah, I think we.
Okay,
I think
will
we
that be
can-
enough to do both items, you think?
Because this one here that we've just been doing,
The sanitary district
is-
budget?
yeah, so what we just did is wrapped up. So we just have this sanitary budget and the ordinance, right?
Okay. So we're done with the regular
You don't
operating
need us to
budget, right?
approve or anything, we're just.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we are now meeting as a sanitary district board.
Oh, that's right.
We are or we're not?
So we will now convene as our Sanitary District 2 Board. And I will turn this over to you, Peter, please.
Okay, thank you, Sanitary District Board members, Peter Brown. So here's what we're doing. I wanted to update you on the feedback we got from your board at the last meeting. And I think that the 2 places to look in the staff report would be under the staff recommendation and the fiscal impact. So I'll start with the staff recommendation, page 2 of the staff report. One of the things that we were asked to do is spend a little more time with the community. And so normally what we do is we have a 30-day an action period, and we're asking for 60 days. So that would be part of your action, is to have the ordinance, if you so choose today, to adopt it, to have it be enacted 60 days rather than 30 days. We do want to have some more time to put some information together for the community so that they understand the program. And perhaps even more of a point from the board had to do with funding and what parameters we develop for assisting community members when we require inspections of private sewer laterals and when we require upgrades to occur. And so what we've done is we've set aside $25,000 out of the sanitary district budget, and this is obviously a one-time appropriation that can be augmented in the future if need be. But under the fiscal impact, you'll see that that $25,000 has been set aside. I came up with a minimum grant amount of $1,000, and the way I envision this is it'd be a reimbursable program. So let's say that, the town has a capital improvement, and it triggers an inspection, and that inspection determines that a private sewer lateral needs repair. Well, there's a condition where, the town would be able to reimburse a private property owner, or excuse me, the district would be able to reimburse through this grant program a private property owner for the work
Peter,
that
I'm
they do.
sorry to interrupt, but before you finish, let me just, because I'm confused what we're doing. This is the sewer lateral issue.
Correct.
That I'm 100%, and I'm going to be with you on this, but I thought we still had to conclude the sanitary district number 2 operating budget discussion. No? Am I
We can do
missing
those
that?
in either order. It doesn't.
Okay, so what we're doing now is we're taking out of order what was previously item 6, number 2, and we're doing it now.
Usually we hear public hearing items before business items. But yeah, we're taking it out.
So we're just switching 5, 2
and
with 6, 2.
See, and I didn't know if, because there was talk that we would bring this thing
And
back
that's why I'm
next
happy to go
time.
with whatever you want, but I
That's why
want to
didn't
understand
know
what
if
we're
we had
doing.
to do everything. We
So-
can do it all.
So what are we doing?
So, well, do you want to,
Peter's not going to be here for the next
Well,
meeting.
so,
Peter,
all right,
but
so,
these are both Peter items.
yes.
Peter? Yeah, okay, can we just
Sure,
continue with
we'll
this?
finish
Then
that.
we'll go backwards. I
So
thought
I'll
you were
move
going
then that we
to this.
switch the agenda items so that we're now going to do the sewer lateral item now, and you can, at your discretion, decide if you want to
Yeah.
do the other item later.
No, well, if Peter's not going to be here.
I don't need to be here for the budget. I think Daria is fully capable of talking about the
Okay.
sanitary district
Well,
budget.
Well,
So why don't we move
Why
that
don't
we
we-
do the sewer lateral now?
okay, because that we
That's
have
a
to
standing
do.
motion.
I second.
Okay.
Okay.
We are voting on moving the order of the agenda to take these sewer
We've
lateral ordinance
skipped one of
before the
items,
public
but
hearing
we've
on
now
the sanitary district
clarified,
budget.
being the parliamentarian that I am apparently filling tonight.
Councilmember Andrews? Councilmember Andrews. Councilmember Bailey.
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio. Vice Mayor First.
Yes.
Mayor Condon.
Yes.
All right, I'm
Oh.
sorry, Peter, please conclude.
Because I was confused.
Do you understand? Are we clear now?
Yeah.
Okay, apologies for the confusion. I don't know that I need to repeat anything that I said.
No.
Just
But in terms of the fiscal impact, so the $25,000 grant, what staff outlined in that section was a minimum grant amount of $1,000 based on reimbursable expenditures. And I think that we also heard from the board that you were concerned about low-income, senior, fixed income type of residents, and we certainly can make that a parameter of the program. And that's another reason for the 60-day time period is we'd like some time to figure out the details of that. But we're hoping that this meets your direction from the last meeting in terms of extended time for public outreach and setting aside funds to assist residents, those that are in need. So I can
Great.
take any
And,
questions you have.
Peter, I'd like to suggest, just because a sinkhole that turned out to be a failing lateral just happened with my daughter. She's up in Las Colinas, and I would recommend, if you haven't already, contacting them. They have a real good program for assistance, but they have it very organized. They will give you recommendations of people that can come out and fix it. People
We
that-
have the same.
Okay, so you've got that, and with the assistance program, it was just a whole kind of, it made it a one-stop shop for her. It was really easy. So I would, if you don't have that or need other information, it was really very, very simple to do. And so any input from my fellow council members? Yes, Diane?
So I'm reading the paragraph under where it says fiscal impact, and I'm a little confused. So let's see, third sentence. It is anticipated that minimum grant amounts of $1,000 can be issued on a reimbursable basis to property owners who meet triggers So there are three things. Number one, who meet triggers for inspection. And required upgrades replacement, okay? Are either low income or senior population, so that would be number two. And then three, it says, and are being required to upgrade a private lateral as a result of an SD2 initiated capital improvement project. So we're gonna be granting for anybody that meets any of those, or are we giving a special allowance if it's SD2 triggered? Or all those three are kind of balanced equally?
So what I heard from the board last time was that you had three concerns. The costs that private property owners would be incurring, that there are certain private property owners that may not have disposable income to do so, and that certainly from Councilmember Bailey, had a hard time digesting the fact that, you're going about, you're minding your own business, and the town's initiating a capital improvement program, and they require you inspect your lateral, and you find out that it's not in good condition. So through no fault of your own and through no voluntary inspection of your own property, then, the town is requiring you to do it. So those to me sounded like the conditions under which you wanted to assist. I think that's a good way to do it. I think you should meet all three of those, but certainly it's up to the board to decide if you only need to meet one of those conditions, in which case you could be eligible for the grant program. That's up to you.
Okay, so, but what do you mean by who meet triggers for inspection?
So that's in the ordinance. So we went through all the different things that require triggers. So we talked about
So,
transfer
let's say
of
they're
property.
adding a bathroom.
Pardon? Yeah.
Like-
so they have an
okay.
addition that's over 50,000. They're doing capital improvements to their home. Those
Okay.
type of things. Transfer of property.
But as this paragraph is written, maybe I'm reading it the wrong way, they'd have to meet all three of these, because it's like 1, 2, and 3.
That's what I'm recommending. So if for some reason, let's say you're not low income, but you want to collect the money, that to me would be unfair. And to Sloan's point, if you weren't doing any improvements, but the town is doing improvement, then, there seems to be some rationale for being reimbursed in that. But again, it's at the board discretion. You're welcome to, this is intended to do two things. The adoption of this ordinance tonight in the second reading, it's intended to meet the board's request to allocate money, the $25,000. We can decide how the details we spend it can be decided later. And then the second thing is a 60-day time period to have time to come back to you and nail down that program.
Okay. Okay, I'm still a little confused with how this is written, but, okay, let's just move on. I'll give my comments later.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Jim?
I'm under the impression that the Ross Valley Sewer District does grants, but also the equivalent of PACE-type loans that are sort of liens on the property. Would we want to consider that just based on the dollar amount?
We certainly can. I don't think that has any bearing on your decision today. That could be a future program.
60-day program, okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, we'll open it to the public. Any questions, comments on this item? Seeing none, I will close it and bring it back. Now on this, what we're doing here is we discussed this at the last meeting, and I'm just looking here. So this would be then our second hearing for this ordinance. And then the plans that we've just been discussing are something that we can add later on, whether it be loans or any other way of extending financial aid for these these laterals?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
the $25,000 is in the draft budget that you reviewed and that you reviewed
Yeah.
the town. The sanitary district budget is coming next item, so.
Okay, so then if I can, if there is a move to adopt the ordinance?
Well, I have some comments. May I?
Yeah.
I'm very concerned that the 25,000 is not going to be enough in the budget, especially if we're going to be doing, I know we skipped over the capital improvement project, but I looked in there and the first couple of things listed were Harbor Drive sewer replacement and El Camino Drive sewer replacement. Harbor Drive is likely 130 laterals. El Camino is likely about 200 laterals. It would be really easy to exceed $25,000, and I'm really concerned that's not enough for a budget for this. Second of all, I'm concerned with the way this particular paragraph, now this is in the staff report, I don't think it's in the ordinance, I didn't see it, but it's written that 3 things need to happen. They need to meet a trigger, and be either low income or senior, and be required to upgrade the private lateral as a result of an SD2 initiated capital improvement project. Certain triggers are not SD2 related, so that's a little confusing to me the way this is written. And
Vice Mayor, first-
every senior homeowner is not necessarily low income, so I don't know why we would have low income or senior. I would like to see those issues hashed out, but I'm very concerned with the 25,000. That 25,000 is not in the ordinance anywhere, correct? It was just simply a reference to it being in the budget.
That would be a sanitary district policy.
Thank
not
you.
not an ordinance issue. And to give you an example for like why we wouldn't include a non-town initiated project, I would have a hard time justifying to your board that when someone is doing a $200,000 upgrade to their home, which triggered an inspection, that we should pay them money for their private sewer lateral replacement.
Right.
I don't know what the rationale would be for that.
Which is why I don't understand the first mention of 2 property owners who meet triggers. So I say that be struck, and we
you
just
can't-
talk
you know,
about SD2 initiated, but that can be hashed out later.
Peter, let me just talk to Diane
Okay.
for a minute. This is the way I think I understand it, is that the town's trying to impose a series of criteria so that you limit the population that would potentially be able to resort to this 25 grand. And it's got to be, first of all, this thing, and the order may be a little funny here because all 3 things have to happen simultaneously. There has to be a sewer district project that's underway, number 1. Number 2, they've got to qualify because they've either got to be like, financially, they have a huge problem, and maybe that's the sort of thing that over the next 2 months we can figure out what does that mean. Or alternatively, they've got to be, 65 plus? I don't know what a normal senior age is or something. So number 1, it's got to be a sewer district project. Number 2, they've got to either have an income issue or they have to be aged. And then the third thing is they have to be about to spend money in order to rectify whatever was triggered by Sanitary District 2 and which they otherwise can't pay for because of their age or the thing. That means they got to pay for an inspection of the pipe, so they have to replace a lateral or whatever.
I
Is
understand
that right?
that, but the third one down here reads, and are being required to upgrade a private lateral as a result of the SD2 initiated CIP. So we don't need the first mention of triggers because that could refer to any of the other triggers. We
Right.
just simply want it to be requirement to upgrade a private lateral as a result of an SD2 initiated capital improvement project. So let's strike the first part that says who meet triggers for inspection. But this is just a staff report, so we don't need to wordsmith it right now. I am just simply saying that as this is written, it is confusing. It is that third point that's the most key, that it is the SD2 initiated. As for the second point, I think low income, I don't think it's fair to say any senior homeowner could qualify for this. I think they should have to be low income regardless of age. So I'm just simply saying, I'm having a real problem with the way this is worded.
Right, well, I think one
Can
thing
we-
too.
can I move
one-
that we
excuse me,
discuss this?
Just a sec. That I think that one thing to realize is that, and it's probably good that it's not in the ordinance per se, but for example, if a senior is going to sell their home and they're going to sell their home for $1 million, and part of the negotiation is, hey, seller, you know, we're going to negotiate this. They're going to net almost $1 million out of the sale. So maybe they don't qualify even though they're a senior. They might be low income, but they're selling their house for $1 million. They might not be entitled to that particular perk. But I think that none of that, Diane, as you point out, none of that is in the ordinance per se. And so I think it comes back to a policy which we can develop later.
Right.
But that the ordinance, the way it is right now, is fine, but that we just need to work out more and wordsmith that little section in the staff report. But that isn't tied to the ordinance. So I don't personally see any problem with adopting the ordinance.
Right. I just, in the future, when they're tackling the actual policy related to any kind of a grant program, I think it needs to be worded extremely carefully so we don't open it up to anybody who has triggered replacement of a lateral, that it just be SD2 initiated, that it's just low income, and
Yeah,
Yeah.
what I would suggest, Peter, is if you could come back to the council at a later date with a clearer policy that runs tandem with what we already have, but with the eligibility for whether it be grants, loans, whatever it is, and various options. But I think that just, this might lead us down the wrong path when we didn't want to be led down the wrong path. And, but as far as, right now, we're just talking about the ordinance. So I think if we can, and maybe that is putting the cart before the horse, but if we could get this done, and then we can review all the needs and wants that we would want for the policy, to be a little bit more clear with the policy, and also to be able to hash over the $25,000 amount and just come up with maybe a clear justification for that amount or alter that amount down the road.
So are you making a motion?
So I'm entertaining a motion.
I'd move the ordinance with instructions of staff to come back to us within 60 days to review the policy, implement the ordinance. How's that?
Thank you. A second?
Second, I think. What's a little unclear to me, can I just clarify what we're moving here? My understanding is that this sanitary district number 2 policy is not a part of the ordinance, is that right? So it's not relevant to the motion itself, and the 60-day grace period relates to the amount of time so that the forms and permits and this other stuff, that gets updated. Again, not directly related to the policy, other than as a council, we've expressed our desire, our public policy, if you will, that there be a sanitary district number 2 policy, correct? Okay, so with that, I second your motion.
I'd like to say I can't support that because, you know, we've got a lot going on and we don't necessarily need to limit it to 60 days. I mean, it would be nice if you could come back within 60 days, but for precisely the reasons you just pointed out, we don't have to put a time limit on when this policy comes back.
No, but we're not moving about the policy. The policy was simply a reassurance, I think, proffered to the, not the council, what do we call ourselves, the district, to reassure us that enacting the ordinance will not create an undue hardship on our senior citizens or citizens who have sort of income problems, but will allow for a uniformity in the ordinances so that they can do what they go about their business, right? Am I getting that right? So in other words, all we're doing is the ordinance. But I in particular had complained that it seemed like it might enact a hardship on some of our people, and so we ought to have a policy, maybe a program, which the staff very kindly put the beginnings of one together, which we've now revealed is incomplete and needs a little more work. It doesn't change the initial question, which is, do we, as a district, want to enact an ordinance which will unify the circumstances under which laterals get replaced? And Jim's made a motion which I have seconded. You are not seconding, you're not, if you vote for this, you're not somehow endorsing the kind of half-assedness of the policy. That still is going to be brought back, right?
No,
Well, you know what I mean.
I understand that. My
Okay.
point is, I think it's not fair to put a 60-day time limit. We've got a lot going on. It's the summer. They're trying to get a lot of things.
On the ordinance itself.
On the policy related to the grants. I would like to vote for, I personally would love to adopt this ordinance with no time limit on returning for a policy about the
policy?
grants.
My understanding is we're not. My understanding is we're,
Isn't that
right?
the motion that Jim just made?
No.
That they'll
That
come
he has
back and
60
we'll start the discussion on the policy.
Right, you wanted him to come
Yeah.
back within 60 days. I'm suggesting maybe we don't require him as part of the motion to come back in 60 days, that we merely maybe request that they come back in 60 days. I don't think it should be part of the motion, is my point. It's not
Well,
crucial to adoption of the
It
ordinance.
isn't crucial to adopt it. It's just that if we adopt the ordinance, which I do not think should be put off. I mean, this is something, I think we're the last jurisdiction in the county that hasn't adopted it. But that if somebody's lateral crumbles, and we don't want raw sewage coming up from the ground from the broken pipe, that there be a policy that will help those people out from the get-go. And so I think the 60 days thing is something that would be easy enough to boilerplate off of all the other jurisdictions, how they do it, so that there is an opportunity if a senior who is hard-pressed for money or somebody of low income has the opportunity to take advantage of such a program. And I think that if it keeps being shoved down the line, that a lot of people are going to either not do the repairs that are necessary or really suffer for it. And so I don't think that 60 days to come up with a policy that could easily be copied off of somebody else's existing policy of a loan program would make a difference.
I think we should just redo the, respectfully, just
You
reword
want
it.
me
And
to
here's the
amend my
thing, we're not
ordinance?
talking about bringing the policy back to you in 60 days. The staff report is related to the grace period to approve the ordinance. It's a 60-day enact the ordinance. So I think we hear you loud and clear. We are going to come back to you with the policy as soon as we possibly can, maybe 60 days, maybe a little bit above. But I think what we're asking you is recommending that you.
The 60-day grace period is purely for the ordinance.
Yes.
It is not for the policy related to the $25,000
Right.
thing
Well,
that
and
we've been
I have no
discussing.
problem if you want to reword that. The only thing is that I would urge staff at its
Okay.
earliest
I'll withdraw my
convenience
motion.
Do you mind redoing your motion?
I'll just
Or
withdraw it. You guys
just
do it.
restate.
Just the same thing except without the
I
last
move the
word.
ordinance.
And the 60-day grace period, yes?
That's written in the ordinance, isn't it?
You're asking,
No,
I
it's-
think that
it's
we.
not. It's not written
It's
in
a-
the
it's a-
ordinance.
It's a
No.
staff recommendation that
With
the
the grace
board enact a 60-day grace period in lieu of a standard 30-day grace period.
Right, and that I will second.
Okay.
Okay, I apologize, I had your titles incorrect on the last vote, so I'm going to try and get it correct this time. Board Member Andrews.
Yes.
Board Member Bailey.
Yes.
Board Member Ravazio. Vice President First.
Yes.
President Condon.
Yes. Okay.
I ask that we just move this, the next item, to the next meeting.
I second.
We're talking about the budget for sewer district number 2.
I move that we continue the budget discussion for SD2 to the next meeting.
Second.
Board Member Andrews.
Yes.
Board Member Bailey.
Yes.
Board Member Ravazio. Vice President First.
Yes.
President Condon.
Yes. And also,
Thank you.
if we could hear our town manager's report, and then if we want to postpone our council member reports to the next meeting, is that all right? Am I cutting anybody off with something really urgent?
No?
Not me.
Okay. Todd?
Just my only report is George Warman's retirement party will be June, is it 27th? June 27th, so we'll be sending out invites to everybody, so we're excited about that. You can't make it.
Great.
Okay, well, we're excited about that, and that's all I have at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, okay. Then, if there is no further business, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.